All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here. I think this is our, what is this, fourth, fifth convening? I've lost track. So today we are going to really be digging into prototype 4 and hopefully leaving here feeling really good about what our final product is going to look like before we really start promoting it even more widely. So as most of you know, you've been here a while. If you need to use the restrooms, they are right where you came in. Take a right and they're down the hall on the right. I know you're looking at me like I'm an airline person, right? We will be having a hot lunch today and doing our celebration of our 2 years. So that will be up on the 5th floor, and then we'll come back down here. We're not going to have breakouts this time. So we're going to be in this room together for the next day and a half. You should have the Wi-Fi if you need that. We're going to be looking at some of our districts and some of their data databases. So make sure that you're able to log into that and let us know if you have any problems. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Penny, and Penny's going to walk through the agenda for today.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Now, we all know you can read, right? But I'm just going to give it a little pizzazz and then we'll move on. So after me, the next voice you hear will be our Commissioner of Education, Robbie Fletcher. Good morning, Dr. Fletcher. So 9 o'clock, we have local accountability session. Fleming, Shelby, and Greenup, wave, hi. Good morning. First of all, let me just say, Fleming, y'all are doing some amazing things. They all are, but I've just been digging deep into Fleming. So I hope you all enjoy the local accountability session. And then we'll have a break. Statewide view will be our innovation specialists, Alexa, Callie, Crystal, and Robert. When we come from local and we go to state, I'd like you to pay attention to how we have an alignment with what's going on, but also understanding that when we talk about local accountability, we're talking about autonomy. See how that jives with the state vision and see if you can't make that connection. And then we have the reflections, facilitated discussion, again with Dr. Fletcher. Now, our lunch and 2-year celebration. Last time when we had our 1-year celebration, Karen, we had Kool-Aid. Are we going to have Kool-Aid again? Nobody drank the Kool-Aid. Ha! No, I'm sorry. No, y'all got to drink the Kool-Aid or we're not going to get this done. I'm just I'm sorry. I'm back. Bring it back. Let's be an adult. Let's be adults. So after lunch, we have our assessments presentation. Jennifer Stafford and Andre Rupp. Always intriguing, always exciting to hear from Andre. By the way, Andre, your snacks look amazing. Thank you for that as always. Thank you for assessment. Great stuff over there. It's like you go from breakfast snacks to brunchy snacks and to after lunch snacks. It's like they trade. It's amazing. Okay, and then we have a break, another break. State accountability session. That's Jennifer and Susan. Thought partnering with the commissioner. I expect that's going to be somewhat intense in a good way, because you're going to make us think. You're going to make us really, when we think about thought partnering, everything we do here is about co-creation, right? It's where we started. So when we talk to the commissioner and we think about thought partnering, how can we advance even more so this partnership with all stakeholders, right? Not just leaving it at the feet of the Department of Education. And then we're going to have reflections and adjournment. Any questions? All right, Dr. Fletcher, come on up.
Thank you so much, Penny. Again, just always, Penny's already made me laugh this morning. We've had a great laugh, and it wasn't even about Kool-Aid. It wasn't about drinking Kool-Aid. It was nothing at all like that. But it was one of those things where I almost spewed coffee everywhere when I heard her say it. And we'll leave that as an inside joke for right now. So, but with that being said, the beauty of today is this: continuing the work in order to build a prosperous Kentucky. We want to launch an accountability system that is useful and meaningful to all learners. So as you go through today, that's the lens. That's the work. That's what the KUWL Council has been pushing forward as a group. So yesterday, I'll admit, I am a huge spreadsheet geek. So I spent about 7.5, 8 hours yesterday looking at the data that you're going to see today. And where does that lead us? Where do we go? And some of the thoughts that I was going through was this. When I came in as commissioner on July 1, I had some strong ideas about where I thought we should go when we talk about accountability. As a matter of fact, if you hear me speak, a lot of times you'll hear the words, one of the reasons I became commissioner is to help develop an accountability system that is useful and meaningful to all learners. So some of my thoughts as I went in were, how do we replace change with growth? Can we replace change with growth? And the beauty of that is, if you look at our data, the people that we're talking to, the people that are giving us back information, is strongly in favor of moving from change back to student growth. Where did you get a child? Where did you take them? Some other things. I was always a big fan of the through course assessments. Now, I have some personal feelings about those, and I'll leave those to me right now. But if you look at our data that we're seeing, that's very common. As a matter of fact, I think around 75% of the people that gave us back information was saying, how do we move to more of a through course assessment style? And also, too, the vision of the Kentucky Board of Education was to, how do we look at vibrant learning? How do we make sure that every single child is getting opportunities for vibrant learning? And also, too, innovation as it relates to accountability. And then finally, of course, is how do we make all that happen? And I'll argue that the only way that'll happen is if we collaborate with our communities. So that gives us some great, as you look through the lens of what exactly are we trying to do as we move forward. And a lot of you have been a part of this for 2 years now, or maybe even longer. So I still have some questions. I sat down and I wrote a lot of information down last night, some directions I feel like for the commissioner. And some of the questions I said was, I thought about is so many of our districts have a portrait of a learner. And they really focus on various skills and competencies. How can that be a part of an accountability system? Essentially, how do we incorporate vibrant learning into an accountability system? I don't really have an answer for that. I have some thoughts. So I'll be really interested to see what the KUWL Council comes back with throughout this day. And the reason for that is you're going to see 3 models today that I'm been very impressed with. First of all, I think Fleming County, is this 4.0? 4.0. So they've been at this work for a long time. There's a lot of great data, and the beauty of that data is they asked their community what did they want to see from their school system, and this is the data we're giving you back. Greenup County has been a part of the L3 system now for 2 years now, 3 years, Tracy, and they've been working on launching a local accountability system. Then Shelby County. One of the things about Shelby County, they're so grounded in the portrait of a learner work, but they really hadn't started working on local accountability until recently. Who's my Shelby County folks? Would you agree? And again, thoroughly amazed with your presentation last week, or a couple, well, actually, time's flying. I've been commissioner now for over 3 months. I don't know how that happened. So it seemed like it was yesterday, was July 1. But the presentation that you gave to our Innovative Learning Network was phenomenal. And that's why you're here today to present that. But you had that strong foundation in your portrait of learning work and what was going on. Then how do you tell your story after that? So again, this idea of including local accountability is something that's really been bubbling up to the top for a long time, and our data is supporting that too, and you'll see that today. That's why we have 3 groups here to talk to you about local accountability, and you can see what they're doing. And I will say this, one of the things that really solidifies this idea of local accountability, Karen Perry shared this quote with me from a district. Doing local accountability work has been a game changer in my district. It's what's been missing. It has restored the community's faith in our public schools. Wow. It's powerful. So how do we look at local accountability to restore our faith in public schools? Does it need to be? What does it look like? How does that go into an overall accountability model? And of course, as you move along, you're going to see a lot of information that deals with everything from social studies and writing. Folks, I'll be honest with you, that's one I struggle with. If you look at our data, the people that we ask questions and give it back, they struggle with it too. So I'll be very interested to see what this group's input is as it relates to social studies and writing. That's a tough decision. How does that look moving forward? And I really don't have an answer for that, but I'd love to see what you have to say. I've got some ideas when writing. Social studies is really the one I struggle with, to be honest. But you're going to see that. You're going to see that data today. You're going to see data as it relates to state accountability, vibrant learning, accreditation style accountability, and others. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk a lot about federal accountability. I do have an engagement tomorrow, so I'll be joining you probably about 10:30-ish, 10:20, 10:30 virtually. I'll probably be on the road, but this part of this work is something I want to be here for. So at the end of the 2 days, the goal is this. I hope that we have a model or a direction that we're moving towards. At the very least, have a model that we're moving towards with maybe 2 or 3 questions that still need to be answered. And then maybe we get some ideas back together, send them out to you, get some input back in, and then look at some type of final model that we can endorse as a group. What does that look like? How do we move forward? But again, remember the lens. Build a prosperous Kentucky. We will launch an accountability system that is meaningful and useful to all learners. Now, I believe that last word was learners, correct? So when you think about learners, is it meaningful and useful, most importantly to our students, also to our educators, to our parents, to our superintendents, to our community, to our business leaders? What does that look like moving forward? Again, a lot of work that you put in. Thank you so much for that. Also want to thank the 3 districts that we have here to present local accountability. And want you to really think about that as we move forward. And there's some great questions that are going on. So by the end of tomorrow, can we have that model that we all want to endorse? And again, even if we have a model, the minutia, the details of it are going to take years to develop. But again, how do we move forward from there? I'll be interested to see how the day looks, especially by the end of the day tomorrow. That being said, any questions for the superintendent? I'm sorry, for the commissioner. I still call myself a superintendent. I do. I probably will in 2 years to be the superintendent. Any questions? After 10 years, it's hard to get rid of, isn't it? I mean, how many times you call yourself a superintendent? Don't say at least 4 or 5 times a day, Jim, please. Thank you, Jim. Thank you. James, you agree with that? James, thank you. So as for the commissioner, that's my part. Any questions for the commissioner? Okay. Turn it over to Karen.
All right, we are going to move into our district presentation. So if I can get a couple folks to help me close up these walls. Our facilitators are going to be the ones to move. So everyone else just stay seated. You're good where you are. We're going to close these walls. So give us a few minutes. Go ahead and grab some coffee or whatever you'd like, and we'll get started in a few. All right, we're ready to get started.
So thank you so much for engaging with us on this really important topic of local accountability. We hope that those were really insightful learning sessions for you that sparked your thinking about what local accountability can look like in Kentucky moving forward. And we would just like to thank all the presenters for sharing their hard-earned wisdom with us as well. So in your packets, the pink covered packet, those are some reflection questions for you. You do have some quantitative data, some qualitative data about local accountability. And then we provided, in the back of that, we provided a small section about some dashboards that have been created by other districts. Of course, we couldn't get everyone here today. So in this section that says Kentucky Local Accountability Dashboards, October 2024, you've got Fleming, which we heard from, but you've also got a look at Logan County's dashboard. You've got Green up there, And then I would point your attention to Kenton County, who also has a local accountability dashboard that has a really different orientation to it. This orientation is really about signaling to their community whether they're on track to meet their goals. So where you see green, and this is their last year's data, where you see green is them signaling to their community, we have a goal here and we're on track to meet our goal if we keep going in the current direction that we're going. So this one has just a really different orientation to it. You can go to their website that's linked there, or just you can actually just Google it right from their district website to learn more about the Kenton County approach to this. There are some divergent models that are starting to come up across Kentucky. And so this is just another view that we didn't have time for this morning, but I just wanted to draw your attention to it. And then Shelby on the back of that one with some more information. So thank you for engaging on that with us. More good conversation to be had. But right now I want to turn it over to Robert Meacham from the Division of Innovation, who's going to bring up their team, who's going to talk about really the current state of lots of districts across Kentucky and their readiness to embark on some of these questions that we're talking about today over the course of the next couple of days. So Robert Meacham.
Thank you, Karen. All right, so first of all, so for those of you who haven't yet met me, I am the Sarah Snipes is now my fearless leader as she took over for David Cook. So I am the less effervescent Sarah Snipes now. Okay, so you know who I'm the program manager in the Division of Innovation. We're really excited to have with us now regional innovation specialists that are solely focused on the pillars of United We Learn. So that's what we're here to do. Is we over the last we've been traveling the state. A lot, lots of miles, because what we realized was getting face-to-face in districts was going to be the most intentional way to get data on how the pillars of United We Learn, how districts are ready, how districts have maybe pushed forward with their deeper learning monies that they've been using, and so that's what we really needed to see, because oftentimes good things are happening and they happen at the local level, and we may not know about them. And so the best way to find that out is to actually get involved with the district and ask them. And it also provides them an awesome way to talk to folks that have KDE badges that can say, hey, we don't have any compliance or monitoring attached to us. We just want to talk. And so it's been really good conversations. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is halfway through your packet of material, there is a regional innovation specialist data report. That's kind of what we have. No slides. We're just kind of going to highlight some of the portions from this data report. And we're going to talk about regionally. So each one of the innovation specialists is going to come up and talk about their region. And they're going to really highlight the challenges and the successes that they're, this is, if we sat there and went through this entire report, it would take up much more time than we have. So we're going to highlight the challenges and the successes regionally. So first up, I'm going to introduce, actually, I'm going to introduce all of them so that then they can just hand it over to the next person. If you turn to the back of that, to kind of give you reference, the yellow portion, that's kind of our northeastern, and then it includes our northern independents is how we divided them out. That's Alexa Harden, so she's up there in our eastern region. And then we have down in the blue section, that's our southeast, we have Crystal Doolin, that's our southeast regional innovation specialist. And then out west in the green section, that is Callie Colley. Okay, so she's out there in the western section. And that, I don't know what that color is right there in the middle of them. Salmon, it's pink. That's in the mauve section. If it was a little darker, I would say it was Campbellsville maroon. That's the section that I'm actually taking right now, as we are. Some of you have worked with Dr. Craig Schroeder in the past. As he has left us, I've been filling in that role since he's left, and we are currently in process this next week to hiring a new regional specialist. So, to get going with the east or the northeast portion to talk about the challenges and successes from that region, Alexa Harden.
Thank you. Good morning. So like Robert said, I'm Alexa Harden, and I am working with 43 districts in the northern and eastern part of the state. Since taking over this position in July, it has been so amazing to see the incredible things happening in our schools. I currently worked before in an L3 district, so I knew what we were doing, but you get in your silos and you don't always see what's happening everywhere else. So having this position and being able to see the incredible things happening across these 43 districts has been absolutely incredible. I want to start out with some of the strengths and some of the successes that I've seen so far in this position. If you look at your packet, you have lots of data, lots of information, but we have several districts. We have 37% of the districts in that region who already have a portrait. And I think it's really important to note that this is all willingly. This was all because these districts recognized that it was important. It was important to them, it was important to their students, and it was important to their communities. And out of those districts, we have arranged some they've just developed their portrait and they are now just ready to come up with their implementation plan and their communication plan. And others, like you heard earlier, they've been doing this for years and they're really in that sustaining category, and really just have that embedded into their culture. Another success and another celebration that we have in our region is the number of L3 districts. And I think what's so valuable about these L3 districts are the power and the work that they're doing, and how other districts now are really turning to these L3 districts. They're really looking toward these L3 districts to see what's working, what have they done, what systems do they have in place. Crystal and I actually facilitated a really cool experience last Friday where 2 districts from southeastern Kentucky who are just beginning their process came to an L3 district in the northeastern region and was able to hear student defenses. They were able to see vibrant learning experiences. They were able to talk to district leaders about creating a strategic plan. And had it not been for this work, we wouldn't have been able to make that connection. And I know we've already had other districts reach out to us just since Friday wanting to do the same thing and wanting to see this. So it's been really exciting to tear down the walls, so to speak, and get people out to see all the great things that are happening. Just like the successes, we also have challenges. And I think one of the main challenges that I've seen so far in this role is the number of districts who are still not engaged for whatever reason. So they may not be engaged because they're unsure of the process. They may not be engaged because they're kind of holding out to see what's going to happen. There's just lots of different reasons, but we do still have a large percentage that aren't engaged with myself or an external partner such as NextGen. We really, we want to work on reaching those districts. Another challenge is the mindset. We still see and hear conversations that it is one extra thing. It is asking teachers, asking school leaders to do something else. And so, I think that's going to be a big part of this role is to work through those challenges and to say, and to help people truly see and understand that it's not something extra. It's taking what we're doing and doing it differently. So, like I said, you have lots of data in that report. It's kind of lengthy, but I think you'll find it really valuable. I hope you do. If you have any questions at all regarding the Northeast, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
My name is Callie Colley, and I am the Regional Innovation Specialist for the Western region. Like Alexa said, it's been a really interesting vantage point. I was in the classroom in May, and then I'm serving in this position starting in July. So having a different viewpoint and different vantage point to see these things going on around the state has been really great. And getting to work with teachers and district leaders closely has been really rewarding for me. I'm currently working with our region has 47 districts, and I'm closely working with about 14 of those right now. There have been a lot of great things happening. We have 2 L3 districts in the West that are really paving the way and doing great things with local accountability. We have 9 districts in the ILN, and the 14 districts that I'm working with range anywhere from just starting portrait work all the way to having those conversations about local accountability and being interested in that. What's really been encouraging is even the districts that are just starting on their portrait already see that finish line of local accountability. I've met with 2 districts in the last 3 weeks who are either developing a portrait or wanting to develop a learning defense system in their district. And both of them made very similar comments about, we're ready. We wish that we could be at the local accountability level now, but we know that all of these things have to happen first. And so we're excited about putting this work in so that eventually we can get to that point. And so that's really encouraging to hear, that they know that it's not just getting a portrait and having that checkbox done, but it is a means to an end. Well, not even an end, it's a means to a continuing process. So that's been really encouraging. And also, I'm currently working with 14 districts, but I've also been in communication with many districts that are not necessarily engaged right now, but have expressed interest. And I think there's really going to be a second wave of districts that are ready to start once they see the things that we're doing with the districts that we're currently working with. And so just kind of those waves of people who are ready, and then maybe the next group that comes in, and that may spawn another group that comes in after that. Some challenges very similar to what Alexa said. Feeling overwhelmed with too many things on their plates, just feeling like they're juggling a lot of initiatives or a lot of things, and changing that mindset. That also leads to another challenge, which is stakeholder buy-in. And we all know that it's really, really crucial to have buy-in from community and teachers and leaders and all stakeholders to be able to make this work meaningful. And so making sure that we do change mindsets in order that we can get that buy-in. And then also, again, lack of response or engagement. And that could be for various reasons, whether it's just not interested, or we have a lot of other things going on. Or I'm also seeing some districts that feel like we have a portrait, so we're good. Like, we don't really need your help because we have the portrait. And so we really want to show these other districts and the progress that they're making beyond just having a portrait and having that be a poster on a wall or a link in a website, and really showing how that portrait can turn into bigger and better things. So the West is doing great.
Hello, I'm Crystal Doolin. I am the Regional Innovation Specialist for the Southeast, and they basically stole a lot of what I would say. We have similar challenges and similar successes, but I will say, if you look regionally at the Southeast, we're probably the least ahead in terms of districts with a portrait, with full implementation and all those things. But the amazing thing is, out of the 38 districts that are assigned to me, 16 of those are working with me. I just got a 17th email this morning. Word of mouth is traveling. And what is really, really encouraging to me is they're opening the door. I had a superintendent tell me I could bring donuts and we'll talk about it. So I'm going to see him, but he's letting me in the door. And I know a part of that is because I'm from the area and we can talk about similarities and all those things. But it's also scary for them. They do have a lot on their plates. They've got a lot to think about. I had one superintendent that gave me a list of all the things he has to think about. And the magic about this is we can then, once we get in the door, start connecting them to other districts. And I'm going to reiterate what Alexa said about what we did on Friday. The two districts that we took up north were two of the first districts that I was able to connect with. They're getting ready for their community meetings. We're having community meeting number 1 in one of those districts this Thursday, but they still needed to see this thing. So we worked together to create a beautiful experience. The district in the north really pulled out all the stops, and they even fed them. I mean, it was amazing. They left so excited, not in a way that I've seen them excited so far in this work. So I'm a little bit of, a bouncy person when things like this happen. So I wanted someone to talk to on the way home because I was excited about it. But they're ready to go. They see the path a little more clearly now, and they have a partner in the north that they now know they can reach out to. But what's even better is those two districts border each other, so they can reach out to each other. So I think that connection and that networking is really important. We're doing that with other districts too. I have an independent district in the south that's they started the work and kind of stalled during COVID, and they're in this space now where they really want to connect with other districts so they can go back and look at what they started and get the momentum going again. So I just connected them with another district that's not very far from them, also an independent, similar size, and they see value in connecting with that person. So those connections are amazing, and my goal is to get everybody connected down there as well as to other parts in the state. To go back to those two districts, this is sort of the way it's rolled in the South. The first month of this position, July, I had about 2 districts respond to me and agree to have a meeting. I got really excited. The next month, I had like 4. That was even better. This past month, there were 10. So it's growing. And like I said, this morning, there's another one. So word of mouth is traveling. Good things are happening. There are, of course, like we said, challenges. One of the biggest challenges I hear in the South is staff turnover, because we have some buildings with a lot of new folks. And one of the things that I'm trying to reiterate when we talk is that you're building a system that is going to work no matter who's there. That's the goal. It's not a system that depends on certain people being in place. Once you get it there and you get it functioning, it's going to have a life of its own, and your teachers are going to be with that no matter which teachers they are. So that's been a big challenge, as well as, like we said, just buy-in, getting people to return your email. And I think a lot of misunderstandings are causing those folks to not return those emails, because some districts who didn't originally return my email, when I do get to speak with them, they find out, oh, this is not what I thought it was. Yeah, we can totally do this. So if we can just get our foot in the door, it makes a big difference. So great things are happening in the South. It's moving. We're going to catch up.
All right, and just to highlight Central Kentucky, Central Kentucky's region has 42 districts in it, and it might be a little bit further ahead than some of the districts. I think partially because of most of the district alignment with OVEC and CKEC and the KEDC. So the co-ops have been very strong in how deeper learning worked over the last couple of years. That's what we kind of saw as most of the districts that I met with, they're like, okay, this is an extension of our deeper learning work, and this makes sense. So there are some huge successes in Central Kentucky. Obviously, to highlight some of the successes that showed up this morning with Shelby County is right here in Central, and they actually hosted the ILN that Dr. Fletcher was talking about earlier, and it was just a fantastic event. Districts left there just absolutely inspired to move forward. It was, we like to do it. Rob Collins over here, one of our consultants in the division, he loves the metric and he reminded us that we had over 267,000 students that were represented by the district leadership that was there. And so if we take that metric down to that, like it's like the ladies have already said, it's growing and it's spreading and it's really encouraging. So there are some huge successes in Central Kentucky. There are still challenges. So one of the challenges is as a football coach, I say not as a former football coach, as a current football coach as well. Got a freshman football game tonight. Pretty excited about Anderson versus Henry County. But what the problem is we see some districts that are hesitant because they say, look, we're doing things excellent right now. We are like we've got this going on. Like we like competition. We appreciate being measured against other people because, well, we're at the top of the pile. We're winning. It's like, yeah, I understand that as a coach, to use sports analogies. So I understand that. So my argument to them, or just to help them understand, is like that's fine. But also every coach knows that you go through ebbs and flows. You go through ups and downs. You go through cycles. You go through lean years. You go through, and so this process is like Crystal said, is building a system so that more of you are winning more often. Right. So that's and even you, like as a high performing district, are going to continue to be successful. This is just an opportunity for you to be highlighted in a different way. So we've seen that, and then another one of the challenges is with districts that have mentioned, like, look, we understand this, but we really need to work. Like, we're still working on our fundamental, our core stuff. We're really engaged in trying to make sure our reading and our math scores are good. And so it's just trying to help them understand that this is not an initiative that takes away from that. It's a foundation, and it's laying the concrete foundation for all those other things to really be firm on for a long time. So that's some of the things that I also want to highlight, just how we are, the language of our report, how we are talking to our districts is the starting, the spreading, and the sustaining. As you see that we've given in the report, it kind of gives a definition of what that means, and that is we try and not trying to rank people, but we're trying to just assess where they're at in their readiness, about a district being that if they're just starting, they've engaged with us, they're ready to go, and they are encouraged by the work. If they're spreading, that they've done something in the past, and they have a system created that they are ready to take the next step forward. If they're sustaining, they're some of our, the early adopters, they're the high flyers that are, ready to be especially the local, our L3 districts, are those often that are sustaining the work, ready to continue on with just anything that comes forward. One of the things, and I really appreciate that I don't remember which district mentioned that they were not afraid of. It might have been Dr. Kreisman actually mentioned the accreditation system that has come up with the 4.0, and that's something that has come up in conversation with districts, because when we meet one-to-one, oftentimes they're like, finally we have somebody from KDE here, and I can ask them like, hey, what's going on? What's the next thing, right? It happens a lot, and what we've seen is exactly what Dr. Kreisman said. Most of them are like, we're okay with that model, but it just has to look right, because like the theory of it is accepted. And then what Dr. Kreisman actually mentioned is like, you know what, if it was some of our to use a Kagan strategy, if it was some of our shoulder partners that kind of knew our context, and it was administrators from next door that we work with on a regular basis that were a part of that accreditation that could come in and look at us. So I've heard that a lot through Central Kentucky, because there's a lot of cooperative in Central Kentucky through OVEC, and they're very tied to the co-op. So that was an overarching theme that I think is exciting. And when I heard Dr. Kreisman mention it today, I was like, that's something that we've heard in a lot of places. So. Obviously, we gave you a lot of data there, and we're going to take this data on kind of like a road show, if we can, to other advisory councils and things like that, to try and get the word out as far and wide, to just hopefully engage those other districts that are just waiting to adopt. They're not late adopters. They're just waiting. They're waiting adopters. All right. So we're gonna get to them too, and. If you have any questions, we're here scattered about all day. But at this time, we're going to transition over to a time led by Dr. Fletcher for some question and focus on the next section. So, Dr. Fletcher.
Let's give our innovation specialist a big round of applause. It's a big lift that we've asked them to take on. Okay, one of the things that first of all, let's stop back. Rob, Sarah, where's Sarah in here? Wanted to go back and talk about the what was mentioned a little bit earlier, the ILN work, the L3 work that we did that Shelby County presented, and the enthusiasm and the excitement that came around local accountability that day. I don't think we can overestimate that. Rob, would you agree with that? Any thoughts on that day that you'd like to add? Sarah? Mm. And before we get into some discussion, what time's lunch? At noon. So we've got some time here. So how did we get here to use so much of this time on local accountability? Let me read some statistics to you. 85%, if you look at our major findings, 85% of respondents are in local are in favor, including locally relevant, relevant information on the state school report card. The next one, between 85 and 90% of respondents believe a vibrant learning experience indicator should include personalized learning pathways, work-based learning experiences, and service-based learning experiences. But there's also other indicators that are in percentages too. But if you drop down to the second bullet, 75% of respondents are in favor of adopting a local accountability system for Kentucky schools that consider multiple factors such as broader school improvement efforts, and opportunities for vibrant learning experiences, parental engagement, community partners, and non-academic factors affecting the school experience. Also, let me tell you a little bit of a story before we get into some open comments. And again, I would like to our next area, I would like to center it around the questions in this pink sheet. I think that would be a good spot that we could share with everyone. On Friday, it just so happens that Dr. Fletcher spent most of the day in Logan County. Okay. And Logan County, if you look at their local accountability system, is very simple. It deals with 4 pillars. And they have different measures that sometimes we think about that, that's important to their district. They went through the process of working with their community. They also went through the process of working with their teachers, with their staff members, with business leaders to say, what's important to our community? And one of the indicators that they utilize is under one of their pillars of student well-being. And some of the data points that they use to really look at school improvement includes student attendance. Very simple, but important. But one of the other statistical points that was used is what percentage of our students are involved in co-curricular and extracurricular activities. If you look at some of the best indicators for how students are successful once they leave our districts, it's how involved are they in an extracurricular, co-curricular activity as they move forward. They thought that was so important that they've included that in part of their accountability. A very objective measure, just what percentage of our students are involved and how can we push that? So again, looking at that individuality of districts and what they do and what they say, I think is so important. The other thing I want to talk about too is I went into elementary classes, and if there are pictures over there of the superintendent falling on the carpet with a bunch of kindergarten kids, I just clumsy at times. I'm sorry, commissioner, not superintendent. Call myself superintendent again. But I actually got on the carpet and sat with a group of kids, and they were talking to me about how they were innovators, which is a part of their portrait of a learner. And yes, I did say kindergarten kids because they were inventing toys and then describing their toys, and then actually standing up in front of their class and communicating about their toys with this guy that's got a tie on sitting on the floor in front of them. And we're like, we weren't afraid. That was a little awkward having me in the room. But it was so beautiful to hear those kids say. I went to other classrooms. I watched one project, they were talking about erosion, they were talking about climate, they were talking about other issues like that. And they had a project they were working on together, but a part of that project was they were telling me how they were being collaborators. I could ask them a question about collaboration, and they were telling me exactly how they were being collaborators. Nobody had to prompt them. Just I asked the question without the teacher around. How are they being communicators? How are they being global citizens? Because part of their project was, how can we reach out and help the people that were affected by hurricanes in Florida? And that's all part of their portrait of a learner, their profile of a graduate. And if you look at, they have, I think, everything from innovative learners, they have communicators, collaborators, and there's the 5th one that I'm missing as far as global citizen. I can't remember the other one, so I apologize for that. But every time I went to another group, the students were connecting it back into that profile. And it was a part of everything that they were doing tied back to the content. All of a sudden, it was relevant. It was relevant. So with that being said, how do we get those type of experiences for all students? So many of our districts already have those profiles of a learner, but how do we get them from being pictures on a wall to being a portrait of a learner? One of the things I'll brag on Greg for just a second. James is in the room. James and I sat. We were the undercard. Tubby Smith was the major presenter that day. But we talked to Greg about local accountability, and one of the things that James is in charge of is helping districts develop their own local accountability models, but working as a co-op. Not saying that this is one model that everybody should use, but how do you look at these processes to implement? So there's a lot of things going on in co-ops to help support that work already. Greg is one of those that's been there. And for those of you that don't know, James was at Shelby County when the Portrait of the Learner work began. So that's a lot of his foundation there. Now moving into this point where we're talking about local accountability at Shelby County, which I think is awesome. Now, I would argue that local accountability was already there. It's just now being named as a local accountability model. So with that being said, when you look through this and you talk about local accountability and look at our data, the question I'm going to ask you today is, are we creating a system for all Kentucky students? Would local accountability contribute to this so that it is meaningful and useful to all learners? And what does that look like? That's the other thing. So as far as some of the questions we have here or comments, let's start off with some comments as far as strengths or innovations in some of the models, highlight unique standout practices, and let's start with those two first. Then we'll get into some concerns because we want to do that too, but let's really focus in on what are the strengths or innovations of what you saw this morning, maybe some of the things you've seen in your own experiences when we talk about local accountability, and highlight any of those unique or standout practices. Everybody jump at once.
And I have the mic, so please raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Fletcher, I love the way that the superintendent from Greenup talked about how she had a couple of schools that had 43% of the student population as students identified as special education students or students with IEPs. And so I asked about career readiness, and part of their accountability system would look at, for example, using math to talk about connecting it to a construction manual, so that we have students that may not be able to master traditional algebra, calculus, but they were able to look at something that's very practical to give them employability skills. And that was very exciting to me, sir.
Again, looking at what's important to your district, then how is that useful and meaningful to all learners in the district? Okay. Others?
I hope I'm on topic, but I liked the way that Fleming County highlighted, or they say they were going to highlight coming soon for student vibrant learning, because one of the questions that I had asked is how am I, on my paper or my notes is, how do we change the mindset from being compliant with vibrant learning through, the presentations. I forgot the name of Defenses of Learning. Thank you. To it's a daily thing that happens. It's natural, and it's something that is done on the daily. I know that Rome wasn't built in a day and we can't just go there, but how do we get the mindset change? And I like the way Fleming's starting to do that.
So others, as far as strengths, innovations in the models, or highlight any unique or standout practices from the models? Yes, sir.
Kind of to piggyback off of what Donnie was saying earlier about when the district leaders are designing the models and having a vision in mind that goes beyond what we think schools and districts, what purpose we kind of see them as serving. I thought it was really powerful when Superintendent Moracy was talking about, 10 years later, we're a district of distinction, but our poverty rate is virtually the same, and our enrollment is still virtually the same. So thinking about, designing some kind of model with that in mind, I think is super impactful.
Again, I think that goes back to listening to your local business leaders. If one of the statistics that she presented was looking at the poverty rate, how has the school district impacted the local poverty rate for that county? And how do you approach that? I'm like, wow, that's a heavy lift, but it's, again, an impressive task for a district. Yes, sir.
Thank you. You know, just to give you some context, I'm in a bunch of education classes right now for college. And it's all the foundational stuff right now. I'll get into the upper divisional education courses later on, eventually, when I get there. But it's one of the things that, you know, I've heard them talk about a lot is experiential learning. And one of the things that's become really indicative, just hearing all the different presenters, is that that's happening here. You know, what's going on. This is where you're learning as you go. You know, what's the best practices? Like, well, we should have done this better. And, you know, you have districts that are leading in that, and they're telling the districts that are coming into it, oh, this really worked for us. You don't have to listen to it, but it's something to keep in mind. And so I think it shows how really collaborative Kentucky is being across the board in making education more effective for children.
So one of the areas that I thought, well, I was pleasantly surprised to hear about is when Fleming talked about the use of the Pritchard Committee. And I'm selfishly going to say that we've worked really hard to get this distinction. We're a gold certified school district where all of our schools in our district, including preschool, are gold certified. I think we're the only one in Kentucky. And so to see that as a measure, because when we talk to our families about what they're proud of and the community of what they're proud of, that is one of the areas that they are most proud of because of the student voice in the agency, as well as the parent and community voice in agency that we've been able to see. We are starting to have conversations about the LAVIC funding and how that's been freed up to add pathways. And so we're not necessarily looking at post-secondary college going, but we're hearing CDL is one of the things, and we want to sit down with like our bourbon industry partners because we realize that moving barrels in the state and where we're located is essential and can be a great paying wage for our kids that want to do that. But we have to remove those barriers for how are we going to get them trained. They can be trained at the age of 18. What does that look like? And those conversations. And so seeing people tap into more affective type data and not just data. You talk about, Senator and Representative, the way that economic benefits and what do schools have to offer everyone. That is an economic benefit, and we are missing out if we're not using resources such as the Pritchard Committee to help us figure this piece out. And so that was very exciting to see that today.
And one of the things that you'll see I think with every district, they've reached out to external partners, and that could be another superintendent in a neighboring district. It could be national organizations. It can be a lot of others, but there's a lot of work here where people are trying to collaborate. And notice it's not about competition with others. It's about competition with themselves. How do we be better for our communities and also, you know what? If Shelby County can push me up a little bit too, and I can get a great idea from Shelby County, let's use that. And thankful that Shelby County is willing to do that work. So that's one of the things that's going through this is how lifting each other up, using external partners and working together. I love those ideas of local accountability. Luke?
Thanks for the time to just reflect on this. I've been really vibing on the local accountability work now for a while, but today a lot of things crystallized for me as I think about the big system. This ability to lead at the local level with the great things that are happening in the schools without masking areas of need. And I saw that in the Shelby model, for example. Another quick connection for me was the real support of relevant comprehensive school improvement planning around local accountability, something beyond just the minimum expectations of federal law. And then I'm just reminded today that our moonshot is to develop an assessment and accountability system that is meaningful and useful to families and students. And so I've seen that across all three today.
I don't know that we will ever get to that level of relevance in a system that takes it out of the hands of the locals, because relevance by its very nature is personalized, it's regional, it's local, and I think that really struck me today, and which reminds me that then we would need a logic model that says, what does it mean at the state level to build in appropriate quality control on the part of the agency and the General Assembly, but trusting in the local folks to build high quality systems with just a minimum floor of what that looks like, and then how the system would develop in support of that local accountability. Lots of musings.
Absolutely. And the things that came to mind when I was thinking, I jotted down some notes here, and you used two words that I was thinking about too. How do we trust our districts to give them local autonomy? And two, how do they develop and implement with support, not only from KDE, but from each other and other external partners? Then also, how do we verify the validity? And something that I really liked that Brian Kreisman brought out was they brought in an external group to provide that validity. And let's go back. I love that model of what they did. He's partnered with other districts. He talked to, for example, Tracy. He called Tracy and said, here's our 3.0. And I can remember Tracy talking to me and say, man, this is a lot of data. It probably needs to kind of slim down a little bit. And this was, and I didn't know that Brian I hadn't seen 4.0. I'd seen a lot of his 3.0 work. He listened. So having that support from people that are outside to lift each other up and also give great suggestions, I think that's wonderful. But that's another way to verify. You know what? I would love for a school system to have come to Lawrence County and said, you know what? I got a lot of great ideas. But you know what? I stole a lot of ideas, or not stole. Sorry. Let's go back for just a second, because we're trying to get away from that competition, stealing, things like that. I was blessed to receive input from another district, and it's going to help my kids. So one other comment about strengths and innovations or unique standout practices.
I just had something to add about the local accountability. I think what I saw again today was that local is important. That's an important word in that local accountability title. But I think we will have to determine, how do we define local accountability? One of the things that Brian said I thought was a great word of wisdom was that sometimes when we think about local accountability, it becomes overwhelming when we look at these dashboards and we think about the people behind the dashboards. I coach in L3, I coach Logan County, I coach Shelby County, I coach Rowan County, and they're all working on this. There's a lot of manpower on the backside. But if we can remember, one thing Brian said today was just start with one piece. Local accountability doesn't have to have 8 pillars or 7 pillars or all. What is the most important thing that you want to build reciprocity within your community, and start there, build it strong, and then you can keep adding on. But I think we will need to make sure we're honoring and valuing all of the local accountability going on in the state, because there are lots more that aren't in our handouts today. But even as the innovation specialists, we're talking about all of the people building portraits of a learner and implementing those in a system. That's the beginning, or it is local accountability, because you ask them what they wanted and you're starting to develop systems to honor that and teach that. So I think we need to remember that local accountability is not just the dashboard, but all the parts that build toward it.
Great point. And again, the theme that you heard of all three. Let me mention one other thing. Brian didn't mention this, but once upon a time, Fleming County was also a persisting low achieving district. The high school was a persisting low achieving high school. They hit their test score marks and decided, are we really relevant? And then here we are. Same thing with Tracy at Greenup County. So you see a lot of districts that have invested so much time in trying to hit those, let's get out of that CSI status, let's get out of that PLA status. We did it quite well. but then how do we become a little more relevant? How do we become relevant for our kids? Again, we want our kids to achieve at the highest levels when it comes to the ACT. We want them to make sure they have AP courses. I'm from an old AP calculus teacher. I think it's extremely important for kids to have access to that. As a matter of fact, there's only 9 states that have all students take the ACT. I think that's important, and I'll tell you why. Because sometimes the first time that a kid may believe that they have the ability to go to a 4-year school, maybe after taking that ACT for the first time. I mean, I got a 24. I could probably get scholarships. And all of a sudden, we're giving access to that kid. We're giving them opportunity. So to me, I will always promote some type of, whether it be ACT or we look at SAT or whatever, some type of measure for students to be able to get into or taking an ACT type test, a college aptitude test, if you will. All right, let's go on to the next one. What specific concerns or challenges are noted regarding these accountability models? And I think we kind of touched on one is making sure you have the support.
Got one over here?
Yes.
My biggest concern is what about our students who jump from county to county when right now Jefferson County student gets picked up on a Friday afternoon, goes to, if they're female, they go to Boyd County. They're held in Boyd County 72 hours for a detention center hearing. Detention center hearings held. They'll sit at Boyd 21 days. They'll transfer to Moorhead. Moorhead, they'll sit for 6 months. They'll do a step down, might go to Otter Creek, which moves them to Wayne County. From Wayne County, they'll move back to Jefferson. And then potentially right now, our highest is sitting at 52 placements in her 14 years of living. So how are we going to decide whose local accountability helps our kids?
I think that's where the idea of personalized learning is very important, because let's face it, how are we meeting their needs now? With the system that we have right now, are we meeting their needs? I would argue when a student comes into a district and we know all those other pieces together, how do we provide them a personalized pathway for the time that we have them to make sure that we meet their needs? I don't have the answer for that, but I think when you go back to local accountability, it's going to be more along the lines of how does a district get them where they need them to be? And again, you still have the federal part. We still have how do you compare with math and reading. Of course, we'll talk about federal tomorrow. But also, too, how do we meet that child's individual needs? I don't have a perfect answer because I think every district's different. And I think that's where you have to rely on that local. Let's step away from accountability a second. The relationships for those kids to make, and again, the accountability is not important for that child. It's how are we meeting their needs? Yeah, we're not now. We're not now.
Our kids go from placement to placement and they're bouncing around, still trying to figure out how to get out of survival mode. And we put things in place, but so many of our facilities are treated as little islands and they're not involved. I've worked with Shelby County for a while and I've congratulated them on the fact that they've been including their alternative schools. But I've also heard today, oh, I didn't know we had that school. It's in your own district. What do you mean you don't know you had that school? So how can we look at, it's fantastic that we're working on local accountability for the districts, but at what point are we going to, being student-centered, start this from the student side and let the students be the leader and let everything go with the students and let it follow with the student in a portal of their own? More than, I'm not saying infinite campus. I'm saying a piece where 2 years ago when we met the very first time and we started saying the kids need something on their side under their social security number, under their data piece, whether they're transient, no matter where they end up in our state or come back, it follows the kid, not the money, not the county, not the whose hat they're wearing, but the actual child themselves. Where's the kid in all of this?
I think everything we heard was very kid-centered. Now, I will say this, I think the issue that we're having is more about communication. When we talk about how do we make sure that the kid, what's important to that child, whereas a reading and math score is not going to be important to that child, but what exactly are the mental health supports that we have for that child? What are the other things that we have that are in place to support their needs? So with that being said, you're going to have some districts that do an excellent job as soon as they walk into their doors, when they have that kind of path of making sure they're connecting with their youth service centers, make sure they're connecting with counselors, make sure that they have an alternative setting if necessary that supports their needs. But we can always get better. So what I'm hearing you is, how do we have a communication system that goes from, even if we look at local accountability, of making sure that that information follows the child to better inform where they are moving forward. Is that did I nutshell that?
Everyone doing it on their own means that all the kids' documentation is different. And I have counties that refuse to accept IEPs from other counties. I have kids that come in to specific facilities and the county's dose says I don't believe that county's dose is IEPs, and they won't take them.
Okay.
And now I got a kid sitting there that's like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm 12.
So you're giving me issues with the current system too.
Right. And what I'm looking at is local accountability. It's fantastic, but we're still saying it's up to the district. It's up to the district. If we keep saying everything's up to the district, who's making sure everybody's districts are talking to each other? Who's going to make sure that our districts still aren't just saying, you know what, this works in our county, too bad for the kid next door? Because we're bouncing. There are more DCBS placements closed. 300 beds closed last year alone in DCBS, shut down over one single incident. 300 beds were closed. 300 children were displaced. They moved from the middle of Wayne County. All of a sudden, they're sitting some in Jefferson, some in Lexington, all displaced. Those kids had never been in major cities. Their pathways are not the same. But now all of a sudden they're sitting in a completely different setup, a completely different system. If their counties are not communicating and their school districts aren't communicating well enough, and we don't have some semblance of interaction and being on the same page, how are we going to keep our kids moving forward?
I think that comes in with the federal accountability portion. How do we make sure that we have the common page with the federal accountability? We start looking at reading mathematics. When we look at, and we'll see more data about that tomorrow, or we look at science scores, or we look at transition readiness, or we look at graduation rates. Now, what I'm hearing from you still yet is we have that now, and we're not doing a very good job now of making sure those things happen. So how do we make sure that a local accountability system, there's communication so that type of information follows the child, and we still have a better personalized pathway for that child? So communication would be the big issue that we're saying, at the very least. Okay. Others?
Just kind of following up on what she was saying. In Jessamine County, where I work, I know we've recently had a lot of unaccompanied minors that have found their way to our schools. And some of them were, 16, 17 years old, and having taken classes in detention centers, getting transcripts from schools from other countries. I think they're kind of falling into the same group of basically their transcript is blank. Like our schools don't know how to give them credit for things that they've experienced or classes that they've taken. They don't even understand like the translation of that class and what it could fit into. So just, I think providing some kind of guidance from county to county, from state to state, even internationally, of how we can not be stuck in, well, that doesn't fit one of our graduation pathways, so you're going to have to start a new one. Setting back a student who should be graduating this year, to basically being a sophomore again. Or I see exactly, I just don't know quite how to, it's not just a federal issue. I think it's finding a way to link the local accountability under a state umbrella somehow of, you have to recognize what this county says counted if this student's transferring in from there, or even, from other countries.
I think, yes. And if you look at a real struggle that we have now as a former high school principal and a former superintendent, is when you have a student that transfers into your district and there's some things on that transcript that doesn't really match. So how do you go back and make sure you meet those kids' needs? And a lot of districts will go into some type of virtual setting where they'll offer something through a virtual program, or they try to connect with a district outside. Again, they're trying to just meet that kid's needs to make sure they get to that point. But also, too, I think when you look at one of the concerns that we'd have to address is that communication again. If we look at a local accountability system, what does that personalized learning path looks for that child? And then when they come in, how do we handle our transient population? So, James, is there anything in the portrait of learner work that you did at Shelby County that might have addressed that? Anything as far as transient populations?
Thank you, and thank you for giving me the toughest question in the room. Looking back at that time period, I would say that we were probably not thinking about scaling the work in this way. But what's running through my mind today is there a possibility that there could be a state agency profile that could be established collaboratively as if it were a school or a district that might allow kids to build artifacts and gather artifacts and store a portfolio of work similar to what they would do in a school district, but that could be honored statewide as the local accountability model. Just a thought, and
that's a great thought. I think
vetted it in my mind, but yeah. I think it's a possibility.
Good point, James. And this too is, if you look at local accountability, what type of parameters are you going to set forth at KDE? What exactly does vibrant learning look like? I think if there's certain things that we want to include in that, there has to be some commonality throughout the districts, especially when you come to vibrant learning. What does that look like for a district? What are some different measures that you could utilize? So without taking away local autonomy, but what are some commonalities that we would expect moving forward as KDE? Does that capture that a little bit better? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, James. It kind of helped me process a little bit there. All right, Penny? I'm sorry.
I was just going to mention the design principles that we have for the works that we've been doing that can also guide that local work. And so I think those will help us think about those quality assurances that we want to make sure every local system would have. And then for me, I also think about that menu of options that would provide potentially a set of, for lack of a better word, guardrails, or to ensure that that the systems have quality at the local level as well. And then I like that idea of I mean, I think we have to guard against having a system that doesn't honor that local piece because we have some complementary systems that serve students that may have some problems. But our policymakers can help us kind of figure out how to align those better. But I do think there's enough flexibility that we can adjust for that, because I understand those frustrations that have been provided. But just go back to those design principles, because they're well constructed, that can help us guide not only the work at the state level, but locally too.
First of all, Dr. Fletcher, you took a little bit of my steam out when you started talking about vibrant learning, because one of my questions is, when I'm looking at the innovation specialist report and you have starting, spreading, and sustaining, and it gives us these percentages about the districts would be considered starting as it pertains to vibrant learning experiences and have pockets of VLE and have systematically implemented VLE. Not just how does that look, but who's determining what a vibrant learning experience is in every district. At this point, Karen, and this was a big thing when we're doing the definition. We're creating the definition of vibrant learning experiences. Some of this is prior to establishing a definition of vibrant learning experiences, because my thing is always going to be, do we give up rigor when we create vibrant learning experiences? That's always going to be a concern for me, right? So when you talk about having some, and people like to use the word oversight, and we like our autonomy, but there has to be some sort of rubric or some sort of identification for these are the boxes that you have to check. And I hate to use that because it sounds like it's minimalizing what VLE looks like across the board. And the other thing is, when I'm looking at this, all three of the counties that spoke with us this morning all talked about vibrant learning, but part of that sounds like it was more the kids were giving you vibrant learning as opposed to them experiencing vibrant learning. And to me, that's a big deal, right? So that's my big.
So one of the things is, how do we make sure that that vibrant learning is happening in each district? What does that look like? Because if you look at one of our data points, it's more about what percentage is offering vibrant learning, what percentage of students are taking vibrant learning versus what's the quality of the vibrant learning. So how do you move forward with that? So that's another parameter, or I'm sorry, another concern or challenge that we'd be faced with as we move forward. Other concerns?
One of the things that I'm always like a negative Nancy about is that I always try to stop and think, are we just doing the same things for the same people that we always have in a different way? So like, are we still helping those same students who are great achievers, but now just in a slightly different way? So if we recognize that there's truly a group out there who's going to struggle, I feel like we tend to be like, well, let's full steam this ahead anyway, because it's different than what we were doing. So maybe they'll pop on, but that's not what we need to do. We need to stop and be like, okay, wait, let's really see how we're going to help these kids who have always struggled, if that makes sense. And then one of the things that I always think about is when we're doing these surveys, one of the things I learned early on in teaching is the people who want to show up are the same people who always show up. The same people who take the surveys are the same people who take the surveys. So how are we making sure when we ask community members, what do you want in your schools, we're getting everybody and not just like the type of people who are always going to fill the surveys out? Because all community matters, not just that group that always shows up, if that makes sense.
I think that's a great question, and that's one of the reasons why we did the 36 districts. If you look at the 18 districts that are part of the L3, they've been working in this space for a long time. So purposely added another 18 districts that are not a part of the L3 work. For example, there's one district in there, and I don't think that he would mind my sharing his name, Pikeville Independent. We're going to have blue, green across the board. Does he need another accountability system? He's doing pretty good there. But they've begun their work even before we started, getting into this. They've started their Portrait Learner work this year to make sure they address the needs of a broader group of students. And I think that goes back to what Tracy said a little bit earlier, is when you look at this vibrant learning experiences and making sure that you also give those 43% special needs kids all the same vibrant learning opportunities that you're going to give all the other kids, and push that. So you're right, it's hard to get people to pull in the data and make people to give the data results, but we tried to do that with the 36 districts. And again, trying to pull out districts that are quote unquote high flying districts, low performing districts, middle performing districts, but also to those that are part of that L3 process already. So we were trying to pull in others other than the usuals, if you will. And we also challenge our districts to do that also. And then you'll see the breakdown of the data that we've had of who's been answering and things like that. Now, as far as the same old people, that's one of the reasons why we looked at this 18 districts and 18 districts as we move forward. So we're trying to get more input other than the ones that we want to we always hear from. So it's a good point. All right, let's look on next question. Do these local accountability models, let me go back and rehash for a second. We need a set of parameters. We're looking at vibrant learning. That's going to be common throughout. Also, too, how do we define quality vibrant learning? That's common throughout. What does that look like moving forward? And then some other things too is communication. How do we make sure we have communications between districts? Of course, right now we feel like the current accountability model is not helping students either. They're going from one district to another. How does the local accountability model maybe address that? And again, please know that we're not coming here to say local accountability replaces the entire system. That's not what we're saying here at all. Okay? We're just saying what part should local accountability play in a model based on the input that we've had. Again, there's still going to be federal requirements. We're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. What does math and reading look like? What does science look like? What are some, we talk about through course assessments with interim assessments versus the actual state assessment at the end. And there's different data points we'll talk about tomorrow. So we're not hiding away from that. And those are going to be commonalities among all districts. Again, that's what we're looking at. That's the data tomorrow to look at. But also, too, how do we give those opportunities for students to have that vibrant learning, and what does that look like? Because that is one of the big pushes of this group from day one. How do we incorporate vibrant learning for every single student? How do we ensure that every single student has an opportunity, not only has an opportunity, but has vibrant learning? So that's a challenge from this group moving forward. So that's what, does local accountability help us with that? One of the charges, again, vibrant learning for all students is the mechanism local accountability. Something to think about. All right, let's, were there any unanswered questions or topics that need further exploration? Type of unanswered.
Once we come up with this wonderful, outstanding plan, how are we going to convince the General Assembly to adopt it?
Well, you're looking at the guy that's going to have to go. What has to happen is we have to go in and talk about, be very clear with the General Assembly, these are the pieces and parts. And also, too, how do we, ensure that, again, we're look at the numeracy investment that's been made. Look at the literacy investments that have been made. We want to continue those. We want to make sure those are happening. And those are very important parts of a federal accountability system that still needs to be there, in my opinion. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that before tomorrow. But if you look at the federal accountability, that needs to be there. Those investments are there. We're not shying away from that. But also, too, if you're a business leader in Nelson County, if you're a business leader in Shelby County, what does this local accountability model mean to you as a business leader? If you're a parent, and I'll give you a good example. I talked to the superintendent of Menifee County, Tim Spencer. And if you don't know Tim Spencer, if you don't know Menifee County, you better have lunch before you go, because you got a Whippy Dip and you've also got Subway. That's your two options. 30 miles out, I had a McDonald's on the fly to get there. And one of the things I talked to him about, he said, Rob, what about, he said, how can we work together with other districts that are just like us to make sure these vibrant learning opportunities? So he was talking about how can I connect with other districts that are just like me to make sure my kids are getting those same opportunities? What businesses do I need to connect with? Maybe I have to do something virtually. And he says, right now, the people in Montgomery County are very good about allowing my students to do these type of things, where it be work-based learning, where it be apprenticeships, things of that nature in other districts that surround me. But I also want to work with the mom and pop stores to make sure that they have the opportunity to have input too. But I need a support network that's going to be counties just like us. And we can lift each other up and find how we can provide those vibrant learning together in similar type situations. And he was all on board for that. And again, we mentioned some other districts that he could partner with and how does that move forward, but it's going to look different for different districts because, let's just face it, the opportunities are not the same in Martin County, which is where I'm from, versus a Shelby County. It's not the same. Yes.
I was literally about to point to you.
Well, VLE is hard to define, or it can be. But another way to frame the case could be, well, VLE is supposed to do something, right? It's supposed to create more opportunities for young people. It's supposed to increase the prosperity in a community. It's supposed to do something that, like, school systems don't exist just to create learning. They're there to create positive benefit for their community. So another way to think about the VLE problem is actually to treat it like it's an input, not an output. And say that a district, as a part of their local accountability measure, could say, we are going to actually grasp the poverty rate as our outcome. And VLE is our mechanism to get there. Or it's health, like we're going to make our community like this much healthier. That really beautiful story that Tracy told about, the young welder who lost his parents to the opioid epidemic. That could be a community level outcome, right? Engaging that number. And so it could be a way of proving the case for local accountability through something like that. Like, just VLE is a stepping stone to something. And that's the thing we embrace as a part of the local accountability, is the community level change that we want to see. And it just would spur different types of partnerships, different types of collaboration, different intentionality about pathways, about like lots and lots of different things could spill out from doing something like that.
Including improving outcomes for kids in the DJJ system. I mean, it should be that aspirational, it should be that audacious and that bold. And vibrant learning cannot be less rigorous.
Right.
It would be hard to be less rigorous than we are right now, as an aside. But it cannot be. It must not be. And we have to rely heavily on the research behind the why vibrant learning experiences matter to every single learner. And it can't be just for the same kids who've always had vibrant learning experiences. It has to be for every last one of them.
Right. And that's why I wanted Donnie to speak, because we were in the little small group that created or hashed out the moonshot. And the moonshot begins to build a prosperous Kentucky. And the conversation was literally, how do we get the legislature, how do we get these policymakers to buy into it? And we do it by putting into the moonshot to build a prosperous Kentucky. So I think that's where
Great point. And two, I want you to also notice every single group that we heard today, for every single district, it was about how do we improve. They identified metrics on how do we improve. And it may be down to how do we improve the situation for our welder. That's a success. How do we spread that to so many other students too? So I think, Donnie, thank you for that. Vibrant learning may be the mechanism, maybe not the output. It's a good point. Okay. We got about 5 minutes.
No, we don't.
No, we don't. Sorry. I'm only commissioner till lunch.
we
well,
actually.
let me close for a second. Sure. First of all, thank you so much This is great conversation. This is where we need to go. These are the type of things we need to ask ourselves as we move forward. How are we reaching every single student and give them the opportunity to have an enriching experience that makes them, not only gives them the opportunity to, it gives them the opportunity to dream. It absolutely gives them the opportunity to dream. It gives them the opportunity to struggle because life's hard. We have to give them vibrant learning experiences that challenges them to learn. And again, learning is a change in behavior. If our vibrant learning experience is just what we've always done and it doesn't create a change in behavior in our kids, why are we doing it? Is it really vibrant learning? I'd argue probably be a better question. And then at the end of the day, we have to make sure that our kids have the opportunity to succeed. And I think the measures that you've heard today really push and give our kids opportunities to do that. Now, how's that look in an overall accountability system? Should it? As we move forward.
Okay, we're going to do a quick temperature check. Susan's going to change slides here. Go ahead and get out your phone, and it's going to just ask you how you feel about, well, it's right up there. Concerning the local accountability district presentations and discussions, I feel. And it's going to really ask about how confident or not so much you feel on that. So we'll give you a quick second to fill that out. Yeah. So it's on a scale of 1 to 5. Is that right, Susan? And we're at about a looks like we're at about a 4 on average. Okay, so we're about a 4.1. Let's go to the next question. The next one should be on your phones. It should just pop up to the next question. In order for me to feel more confident, I would need, for where we are with local accountability, in order for you to feel more comfortable or more confident about moving forward with a local accountability system, what would you need? What would you need to know more about? All right, so once you're done there, we're going to go ahead and take our lunch break. It's going to be on the 5th floor. You're welcome to use the restrooms down here before you head up. Of course, there are some 2 different areas for restrooms up on the 5th floor. We have someone up on 5 who will let you in when you get up there, and we'll be in one of the collaboration areas on the east side of the building for lunch. So I hope you enjoy. There's a nice hot lunch up there for you. Thank you all. Okay, folks, we're about to get started. We're having some issues with the screen over here on my far right, and we are going to be looking at data. So please feel free. I know that we've had some people already need to leave, so you may need to find another seat over here, or feel free to stand and wander around. It's totally fine. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. We're going to get it kicked off here with Jennifer Stafford and Andre Rupp.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome back. I hope you all enjoyed that wonderful lunch. Thank you for the hot meal. Lots of carbs. So we have some important work this afternoon. So please hope that caffeine from the tea kicks in as well. I'm Jennifer Stafford, and we're going to talk this afternoon around 2 topics. We're going to talk about assessments, and we're going to talk about state assessment. So those 2 things are separate but interrelated. So assessments, we're going to start out talking about the approach that was taken in 4.0, in the prototype 4.0. There were decision points in 4.0, and as well as a direction for how to implement some of those long-term goals and some actionable steps that could get us toward those long-term goals. So this afternoon, what we're going to do are we're going to have these 2 sessions, one on assessment, one on the state accountability. So we're going to tee up here just a little bit as a refresher for you what was in version 4.0. Then we've got some data slides. We've got the green packet that is in your folder. This is the one that we're using for this section. There's data slides in there. And then we're going to go through those data. Leslie is going to take you through those. And then you're going to have a lot of time to look at data. We're not going to ask you to go back and reanalyze it because there is some summaries for you. Dr. Fletcher this morning quoted a few and read a few of those. So if you'll pull out this little packet as well. So those are the two things that you'll need for this section. Now, as you know, we've been following our moonshot to get us to legislation for 2026. We've developed these prototypes. We started here in summer 2024 developing the prototypes. We moved into the study phase. So that study phase was around 4 months that we have been doing multiple collection of feedback. We've had survey data. We've had survey data around 4.0. We've had survey data around readiness. We've had focus groups, and we've had groups that we talked through about the different models. We've collected their qualitative information. And so we're coming together today to share that with you and for you then to react to that data. So we want you to look at the data around these different concepts, and we want to gather your reaction because the next step toward our moonshot is to develop a general direction of where we're going. So out of this meeting, out of this 2-day convening, is going to come not another prototype, but a general direction of where we will be in that what a proposal or direction that we want to go with these different systems, with both assessment and accountability, whether it's local, state, federal, and then our assessments and then reporting. So all of those pieces, we're going to ask you, what are your direction of where we want to go with that proposal? We're here listening. We're going to be writing, and we're going to be bringing it to you so that you can then react to that. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going with this. So let's start again with assessments. And Susan, if you'll go to the next slide. So as a reminder, in 4.0, we had some long-term goals for assessment, and that was possibly moving to a competency-based system that's streamlined, that includes authentic assessments, that provides some real-time feedback so that it could be meaningful and useful to our learners, also the educators in our schools. So in service to our moonshot, moving toward this competency-based model that has some authentic, authentic demonstrations includes a possibility of stepping toward the competency-based model that starts with through year model. If you'll go to the next slide. So if the end is a competency-based model, where we could start is we could start with removing the social studies and writing to that competency-based and developing the capacity within our schools and districts toward that. So we can't just turn it on and off like a switch, because we have to develop the capacity within our educators, within our school leaders, within our district leaders, and also within our students to be able to develop competency-based and authentic demonstrations. We have to have a long on-ramp toward getting toward that model. So starting first with the social studies and writing, developing that capacity. At the same time then, we would move our reading and math to a system that has multiple interim assessments and a final summative assessments. For example, we could do a fall, a winter, and possibly a spring interim with a summative assessment that would then would meet that federal accountability proficiency test. So we can move our content areas in reading and math toward that through year model while we're developing those competencies around our social studies and writing. So simultaneous paths to get us to an end goal that would eventually have all of our systems on a competency-based model. Now, that would take a good bit of developing and an ability to demonstrate to the federal government that we can provide those competency-based assessments that has the rigor, has the alignment to our state standards, and that would meet that federal requirement. There are technical standards that we have to meet in state assessments. So we would have to demonstrate to the U.S. Department of Education that our competency-based model could meet that. So again, long on-ramp to getting to that final competency-based model, if that's the direction that we want to go. Okay, so those are a lot of questions packed into that flight path. Okay, so we're going to ask you to then look at the data that was collected, and there's both the qualitative data as well as the quantitative data. So I'll turn it over to Leslie at this point.
Good afternoon. I'm Leslie McKinney, and I'm one of the strategic data analysts and researchers here with the department. One of my colleagues also helped me with this data. So we're going to kind of break this up over the course of the next 2 days to share this data with you. I'm going to go fairly quickly through this data because there are a lot of data points here, and we want you to be able to get to the work of really digging into the data rather than just looking at some graphs. So I'll go fairly quickly, but just to set the stage a little bit for you, there were about 647 respondents to this particular survey from a variety of stakeholder groups across Kentucky. We have actually, at the end of the day, maneuvered some folks around into the other group because they were essentially one-offs, like just a few students or just a few of a certain sort of industry. But we certainly wanted to be able to capture their thinking and feeling, particularly as it came to those qualitative data points that Jennifer was talking about. And so you're going to see that who we're including in the other group, you'll see a list of those along with the end count of those here on this screen. Additionally, it's important to understand that not every respondent answered every question. So end counts may look a little off as you look question to question as you go through here. Some may have selected simply not to have an opinion on a certain data point. And so we've tried to provide that for you. Also, you're going to see there are almost 2,000 open-ended sort of comments throughout this survey on various topics. And so we've done our best to sort of theme those for you. You'll see that. And for transparency reasons, because we do think tone and actual words that people use when they answer an open-ended response are important, we did theme them for the purpose of this discussion. However, we have provided for you examples of pretty much what that language looked like. And so we do want to encourage you to take a look at some of those and see that feeling and that passion that's coming out just of a lot of those comments. So if it's okay, we're going to move forward. I'm going to cover the first of the 4 domains that we'll be talking about over the course of the next 2 days. So the first question really looked at whether or not social studies and writing should be removed from essentially from the accountability system. as its own indicator. And in this instance, you can see that 87% of folks across those stakeholder groups believe that it should be removed as a part of that since it's not federally required, as a part of the state accountability model. You can see that within certain groups, there's much stronger agreement. And I do want to caution you when you start again to look at some of these smaller in count groups, they're important. Their percentages for agreement are important. We want to make sure that we do highlight those, but keep in mind they can be as few as 4 people in this case. So just kind of watch that as we go through here. But this will give you sort of an indication of where most people felt, but overwhelmingly folks did feel like in the way that it currently stands, it should be removed. It's probably also important to note that the way these questions were worded, it lumped those together. People weren't asked in isolation, how do you feel about writing? How do you feel about social studies? They were grouped together in the same question. So they were forming that opinion based on the removal of both of those content areas. So next slide, please. When we look at the next question, it's really talking about if we were to remove it from the model, should it then be reported more in a local level as a reporting to the public for those indicators on, in this case, a performance-based sort of measure. And so again, overwhelmingly folks felt, 2/3 of folks at least felt like that should be something that's reported through a performance-based type activity. And across, again, the stakeholder groups, you can see how folks tended to agree or not agree with that statement. But this was one of the higher areas in terms of the median number moving forward. The majority of groups, with the exception of one, did feel like that was the direction that the department should go in terms of making recommendations, or the council, I should say, should go. Next slide. And so to follow up on that next bit was if we do move towards that, should the state begin building sort of capacity at the local level for making that happen? And again, 2/3 of stakeholders felt like that was an important component if you're going to move forward as a metric that districts and schools would need that level of support coming from the state in terms of direction. And again, some pretty high levels of agreement as you move through some of these, particularly as it pertains to social studies and writing. Okay, next slide, please. This one is really talking about whether or not we should move to a year-round model for, as Jennifer mentioned, math and reading, where it would be assessed 3 times a year. And there's a kind of a follow-up question you'll see later to this one, but this one is really talking about should you move towards a year-round method of being assessed 3 times a year. And 75% of folks, 3/4 of folks felt like that was a good direction to move. So rather than the one time at the end of the year, be assessed multiple times throughout the year. All right, and when we start to look at this one, in terms of, again, public reporting of social studies and writing, you can see that 57%, and we did see some real strong agreement with a couple of groups stood out here as compared to where the sort of norm was. And so if you look at the educational cooperatives and KDE staff, they typically felt much stronger about this being a public reporting of, again, those social studies and writing components as a part of the new model. This question really gave them an option of whether or not they felt like the new sort of design of the new assessment should move more towards an adaptive assessment that sort of changes levels as the students answer, or go with one that was more streamlined and sort of followed more of a scope and sequence in terms of following the standards in that way. And 56%, so the majority did feel like they preferred an adaptive assessment. You'll be able to see again between certain groups where folks felt more strongly than others within certain groups. And the next one is really looking at if we do a through-year model with math and reading, would it be the spring administration that would count for accountability? And the majority of folks did feel like if that was the case, that we should look at the spring assessment as the final accountability metric. I told you it was going to be fast. All right, this one is really talking about whether or not districts and schools would be in favor of replacing the interims they currently use on the local level with one that the state adopted that went through and was consistent. I know we heard about that this morning as well. And so you can see, again, good support. Over 2/3 of folks felt like that districts would be in favor of replacing their local interim assessments with one that the state sort of looked at for a year-round model. When we start to look at qualitative questions, this is where I was talking about the themes a little bit. On the right-hand side for you all, you will see a quote that is a direct quote. We tried to include those where we could, but we also wanted to theme some things, and I want to kind of tell you just to set the stage for when Abby also comes up here. We decided, looking at the way that we interpreted this data, that anything over 25 direct responses in a specific area we would consider a theme. That means there are many more responses that didn't necessarily fall into one of these groupings. If it was just a common dissatisfaction, sometimes people use open-ended opportunities to talk about things other than the question. And so, but that's oftentimes important to know. So we have tried to capture that in other, if we didn't feel like it directly assessed the question or gave you feedback on the question. But you can see that there were some concerns that didn't fall into the themes. You'll see a little highlight of that at the bottom, but again, the documents that you have at your seat will give you a better indication of that. So when we talk about, oh, can you go back one more? I'm sorry. I need to jump right in there. Sorry. These were the ones that rose to the top as the highest you can imagine. Funding was a great concern. And this funding went from everything from we need more staff for funding, some training kind of overlap with that. And the second one, we need high quality instructional resources. That funding should be more equitable so that everybody had access to the same resources in order to get that more unified. And so it really covered a whole gambit of things, including things like more funding from the state in general. So it could have kind of gone any direction. Obviously, they felt like there would need to be a lot more training and professional development, specifically as it related to the implementation of things like performance events, things like using high quality instructional resources. Assessment came up a lot here with people's interpretation. There seemed to be a general fear by some that they weren't equipped to really assess things at the local level. If that was going to be something that was uniform across the state, that there would need to be training around that. Assessment clarity and structure really looked at everything from should it be a through-year model? Will there be an item bank of questions that we can go to? It could have gone in a lot of different directions. You know, what kind of accommodations are going to be available? How will they change across time? Equity really, it was as much about district equity as it was student populations, if I'm being quite honest. There was a lot of concern that rural or impoverished districts, smaller district would be at a disadvantage if a local measure came in. And so again, while it may not be specific to some of these questions, there was a great deal of concern about equity and them being able to compete, have the same resources. To give a quick example of that, some folks pointed out, you know, there are districts who can afford coaches and high quality curriculum people that can come in and help their schools, but not every district has those. And so wanted to make sure that was going to be a level playing field in terms of equity. Curriculum instructional standards, real call for making sure that these assessments align closely with the standards at the rigorous level that they should, and how will they know, and how will we make sure that's calibrated across all schools. And then finally, a great deal of concern and also good positive feedback about the monitoring and standardization to make sure that districts were competing on the same playing field here, and that some districts didn't have advantages, some schools didn't have advantages just by their pure design. So again, you'll be able to read lots and lots of thoughts. The package you have, just one more thing, is not all-inclusive. It does not have everything. If we had a lot of redundant comments, we sort of left those out. You got the general feel, but we wanted to put enough in there for transparency's sake that you could sort of see the general feeling. Okay, next slide. Sorry. Oh, thank you. All right, so this question really talked about what sort of instructional information would be necessary for folks to adopt sort of this model at the local level. And there was a lot of misinformation, I think, or misunderstanding about what this question was asking. So we got a lot of comments that really fell to other questions. If that was the case, we put it where we thought it best met the need. But some of the things that came out here was obviously the biggest thing on folks' mind is we want this data back as quickly as we can. If we're going to inform instruction, we need that data very quickly. And so the turnaround time so that that data is actionable. Also a call for deeper data than they've been getting in the last model, where they can actually drill in almost to a diagnostic level by some requests to really drill in and see what skill gaps there are with particular students, for example. They really want to see more actionable data, meaning not that big data. Individual student growth measures came up a lot. It came up a lot outside of this question. Folks really want a strong component of growth as a part of the metrics for an assessment system moving forward. Now that's individual student growth, growth within student populations, and also schools in general. So a call for that growth measure to come back or to maintain, to make sure again that whatever assessment is put out there, who is going to make sure and how are we going to make sure it aligns to the standards and that everybody's understanding of what that standard is getting at is equal. And then finally, again, a real call for really deep level data, like almost to the point where you would use it for students who had extreme deficits to really get in there and diagnose what learning skills and gaps that they have. Again, at the bottom, we have just a little bit more information about some other things that sort of came up. And to kind of close this off, I will tell you, there were, just out of pure transparency, there were several comments that expressed concerns about changing the model yet again, just when people felt like, and I know that's something that you've heard, but just want to be real clear, that came up a lot. So for consistency's sake, that was something that people were quite a bit concerned with. And then the last thing that tended to come up a lot within this section, again, not necessarily in one question or the other, was this idea of equitable technology. And not just equitable that we all have the same amount, but also the kinds of technology they would need in order to really collect and analyze data at the local level. That they didn't necessarily feel like everybody had that level of technology resources or expertise. So I am going to turn this over now, and thank you so much. Well, first, should I say, are there any questions before I do that? Sorry, that was very quick. All right, then I will turn it over to Sarah. Thank you.
So I will fly through this as well to give you all time to do the work of digging in. As Dr. Fletcher had mentioned earlier, with our 36 districts, 18 of those consist of our L3s, our local laboratories of learning around the state, who have been engaged with us in local accountability work now for 3+ years. But we thought it was equally as important to include a comparable data set of districts who were not within that circle. And so here on the screen that you see are the collection of 36 districts who've engaged with us during the study phase, specifically around some of these surveys, but also a focus group conversation. So in partnership with our team at the Division of Innovation, as well as OVEC and UK Center for Next Gen, we facilitated a 90-minute focus group. And we had representation from all 36 of our districts, consisting of just over 200 individuals who participated across stakeholder groups in this conversation. So what you see are the breakdown of the folks that we had attending: superintendents, district assessment coordinators, instructional supervisors. We were also joined by chief academic officers, principals, assistant principals, teachers, instructional leaders, parents, community members, and students. And so we had greater than at least 10 representatives of each stakeholder group present on this conversation as well. Some key themes that cross stakeholder groups. We heard, and this aligns very well with what Leslie just shared, our stakeholders in conversation within the focus group also mentioned a desire for frequent actionable data access. So again, emphasis on the actionable data, really positive feedback on the systems that are currently in place within districts, a lot of value locally on the information that folks get now from MAP, STAR, iReady, and those local interim assessments that they're using. But they did caution around streamlining so that we're not creating more assessment, really wanting to make sure that in part of being actionable, teachers, educators, and leaders have time to do something with that information. So wanting to streamline those systems to avoid any redundancy so that we maximize the information given so that our educators can grow students with what they are given in that information. And then lastly, again, another highlight of these performance-based assessments, a lot of value put on those as they pertain to increasing our focus of vibrant learning experiences across our districts, and wanting students to have more opportunities that they might not already get out in their interim assessments through demonstrating real-world context and application of their knowledge. So those are some cross-cutting themes that we heard regardless of stakeholder group. What you'll see in your packet on the following pages are a breakdown of theme by stakeholder role. And so you'll see a key theme that arose, a synthesis that kind of gives you a little bit more context into that trend, and some sample quotes that accommodate that information. At the top, you'll see the question that was posed within the focus group. You'll also see the focus group, the stakeholder role that's represented in each page. And you'll see a trend summary. So a real quick snapshot, cross-cutting of those themes, representing what that stakeholder group reported relative to assessment in this case. So just to give you an example, our chief academic officers had many questions about proposed three-year assessments. A lot of curiosity, not necessarily being against the through course assessments, but really just this curiosity around how they would integrate within current systems. They were concerned about any additional time and resources that would be required in staffing capacity to make sure that that is done well and to ensure that they have the resources to do so. And then the potential loss of social studies and writing assessments was a concern for this particular group, as noted in their feedback as well. So you can flip through as you look into your data. Again, you'll continue to go through there, see the stakeholder groups that were present in this focus group and the themes throughout. So I want to make sure we have time to digest all of that.
Okay, so now it's time for you to dive into the data. And again, we're not asking you to synthesize the data. It's already been summarized for you. We're going to ask you to, in your tables, to look at the data. See if there are any ideas that were surprising to you. We want your reaction to the data or to this element, because again, we've got to have a general direction of the way that we're going. So look at the data. Were there any things that surprised you or maybe changed your mind about the direction that we should go? Are there other considerations that we need to include in assessments that are not already in there? Okay, so about 45 minutes for you to dig into the data, have your conversations at your table, and then at that time, we're going to come back and we're going to share out and have a discussion around the direction we will want to go in a proposal for our assessments. Now, there's links to the 4.0 document, and that is on the back of the agenda. If you want to look at the proposal, or not the proposal, but prototype 4.0, there's a link there. There's a QR code, possibly, and a bit.ly to the version 4.0. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to just quickly add one question because Jennifer she did a great job at talking about the question we want you to consider. And as you can see, they're not quite those questions. Those are written a little bit earlier, and they have sort of this like analysis misconception flavor. As Jennifer said, that's not what we want you to do. But the one core question really at the end of the day is, what needs to be true for you in order to support the ideas that are currently in the prototype? And that could mean that, hey, as is, that is enough for me to say, like, I essentially support the department in doing the policy work to advocate these higher level ideas. Or it could be like more information is needed, or I would advocate that if you do this, here's the additional steps that you should take in order to do additional work on that. And I want to be clear that as you think about this, this idea of like, study phase is over, again, that's not quite the idea. Like if any of this gets implemented, and Dr. Fletcher said this earlier too, there's going to be a lot of legwork that has to be done, right? There's going to be a lot of like mocking up of different alternative designs, piloting something that is even in the prototype. Let's say if we want to do performance assessment at scale, maybe you should pilot this, and we should use social studies and writing as the piloting work with certain select districts. So you should not take any of this as like saying, like, if we do this, there is already some hypothetical model that gets implemented one-to-one. It's more about like, are these general higher level decision points that are currently on the table, are those ones that resonate with you? That's the question for KDE at the moment. So I hope that helps a little bit. And thank you, by the way, to the KDE staff. You did an amazing job, if I may say this, at summarizing all of this. I've seen so many mediocre and also some amazing, but I've seen also some mediocre presentation in my life. That was amazing. I just loved it. So thank you so much for doing such a great job with that. All right.
we're going to, so 25 minutes for your table discussions. So, thank you.
All right, everybody. This is the time. This is the time when we're going to talk to one another and hear a little bit what the big ticket items were that were on the table that were being discussed. So as a quick reminder, I mean, one of the things that I heard when I was walking around is sort of this idea that people are obviously wrestling with different parts of the sort of like the assessment elephant, right? So there's this idea about like, well, you know, which subject area should be assessed. How do we deal with the is the interim replacement specifically the issue, and how do we make really for our policy friends, right? Like, how do we take advantage of this policy opportunity that is right now and advocate for things that are sort of in alignment with what people want without corrupting that process, right? Without trying to make sure that we don't encode desires or features of systems that are actually opposite to the ideas of what people have been articulating. So that's the big struggle for Katie, and it's a tough one, right? Because assessments are on the one hand integrated into accountability systems, and they have a specific role there. And then you can also think about obviously assessments in this more curricular embedded way, and thinking about sort of the balanced assessment systems that exist at different levels. And on the table in this prototype are specifically, I think, a few big ideas, which is this one idea is this replacement of any kind of local interim assessment system, so iReady, MAPS, STAR, with a state assessment system. And as I said to some people, I hope when you were discussing this, you probably thought, I wonder how the state would then get that, and who would develop this. And you would know that there would be a vendor, probably, that would get an RFP, and it would take expectations of robust designs and national norms and all of that. So I think there's a lot of these things that are lurking always in the background when people are answering these questions, because people have expectations of of the quality and robustness and rigor of sort of the alternative, right? So that's one. The other one was social studies and writing. So should that be part of the state assessment system or not? So there's that. I mean, you could even say the VLE, vibrant learning experiences, that sort of whole idea of having an indicator for that, that'll probably lead to assessment type flavors. You know, whether you, it's on the one hand about the opportunities, and on the other hand, it's also about gathering evidence from assessments that students complete or performances that they do. And then finally, performance-based assessment, this whole idea, you know, they can take on all kinds of flavors, from local assessments to state standardized performance assessments. So where are you on that? So let's hear from you. Who would like to share some of the tensions? Remember, one of the questions was, we're going to go in the corner. One of the questions was, what needs to be true so that you feel comfortable with supporting some or all of the ideas in the current prototype document, or where do you have concerns? Let's hear it. And why don't you say your name too? That would be nice for everybody.
Hi, my name is Alfonso. I'm a Spanish teacher in Jefferson County Public Schools. Our group came up to two ideas. One that really we were not able to wrap our head around this. In the data about the survey, we are page 1, we are talking about developing this accountability system for our students. There's no students involved in that survey. There's no feedback in this document from students. I mean, not even in the other category. I personally would like to hear the few students that are here today so that they could speak to this. Because otherwise, we're going to go again to the same thing of adults trying to create things for adults rather than students. And two, our group was also discussing, and I would be glad to let Dr. Niehoff to talk about this, about how it would be important to make a bigger survey, because are we truly going to try to do this based on the feedback from 647 people. When we are 171 school districts in Kentucky, just alone in Jefferson County Public Schools, there are more than 7,000 teachers alone.
Yeah.
So if you would like to add up.
Well, thank you. What we just discussed was the possibility that maybe with 4.1, the group could agree on an N number in the survey that we wanted to achieve for the volume of feedback. And then when the group reconvenes, we would know that we had that level of feedback around 4.1.
Yeah, so I have to say, as a methodologist, I always appreciate when people talk about like research methodology. So I think it's really important to talk about blind spots, about representativeness of samples. And this, I think, you know, we've been talking about this today, that there is no way of getting around additional cycles of learning. No matter what the policy train, what is happening at the same time there, but there has to be additional cycles. So I think that's really important. Trevor, though, do you want to talk? I mean, I don't want to, yeah, I kind of want to put you on the spot. Would you like to say something about your perspective in particular? All right, let's hear it.
I promise it's not going to be eloquent. And, but, you know, looking at this right here and looking back from my own experiences in high school and, you know, and going through the K through 12 system in Kentucky, I'm also need to clarify this. I'm studying to be a special education and social studies teacher at EKU right now. And I was at first kind of shocked that they were taking away the formative assessments of social studies, because, you know, your first impression is, oh, then they think it's not important. But I'm realizing that that's not the case, really. I think really what the case is that what we're doing right now is not an effective indicator of student success in the subject. And by putting in those local assessments, we can assess that more clearly and more accurately that students are learning. Looking back at my own experiences, well, some of my favorite times in a social studies classroom was not watching a PowerPoint and memorizing dates or, you know, or something like that. It was when my teachers told me to get up and debate the person across the room or make a little, you know, model of something or draw something out. And that was vibrant learning happening before that, before I even knew what it was called. And I think using these local assessments, we're giving teachers more autonomy in being able to do that. Because they're going to have more time. You're taking a lot off their plates, and being able to show, allowing students the ability to show that they are learning makes them excited about it. And also by taking away that kind of portion of the formative assessment, and by, you know, technically freeing up teachers in a lot of ways, that allows them to become more passionate about their own teaching, which, you know, directly correlates to students being more passionate. And so I think it's a great thing. I love it. Live, laugh, love it, you know, so.
Oh, that was so eloquent. I love it. Maybe I point out two things. I think in your response, I think I heard you say that it's really about removing social studies from a high stakes summative evaluation context and focusing more on like locally administered and designed assessments, and that then can have these formative assessment that can support formative assessment practices is what people generally like to sort of differentiate for that. And so then, yeah, so I think that is sort of on the table, right? Like, do we essentially trade that in, and are we comfortable with that? And it seemed to me like you were really enthused about that based on your own experiences, for example, that resonated with you. Yeah, please.
Okay, so we talked a lot about that too. And social studies, the fear of losing social studies and writing is something I heard about from people around me before I even saw this data. They were like, they're going to come in and take out social studies and writing. We're not going to be tested on that. We're not going to teach it anymore. And that's a very real thing, given that we don't teach social studies. What grade is it? Fifth grade. Okay. So they don't get social studies until 5th grade because that's when it's tested now. And that's just what it is. And when we start losing funding and resources, like I said a second ago, my daughter, earlier this morning, Greenup County said the PE thing, right? Well, my daughter took PE for 1 week in the summer and it counted for entire credit. That I fear that that's going to happen to social studies. So what we discussed is how do we create a system that is supportive of a mind shift? Because if we can put this stuff at the local level and like these different competencies, that's great. But we are working on 30 years of if it's not being taught or if it's not being assessed on the test, then we're not teaching it. So that is a major mind shift that we have to begin to address and see how do we build a system that supports that. Did I cover that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, that
Sorry,
was
you were
good.
asking your table mates. Yeah.
No, yeah.
I was just, my was about, I thought it was very clear, and I think it's this, right, it's that concern that the signaling function of assessment is really so powerful, and that other things that you do essentially in the system cannot compensate for that. It's immediately, once the assessment is gone, there's this entire, the dominoes fall sort of like all the way through. But there's there's obviously other things then that could be done. I think to me, it's also a call out of saying, number one, we have to be really careful in thinking through the entire systemic implementation and evaluation processes and unintended negative consequences, and not just sort of talking about the desired features. And I think it encourages people to query this thing about, so if we focus, I think there's this belief that if we foreground and focus vibrant learning experiences and all the educational transformations that are happening, and people buy into that, right? And that there seems to be a lot of buy-in, that will naturally then compensate and incentivize people to sort of say like, hey, social studies is important, writing is important, interdisciplinary work is important. We should have that as part of the body of work in the educational design. And I think if that's a correct assumption, then yeah, you would probably be more comfortable in saying then, yeah, maybe then it's fine to move that out of the system. But if that's not the case, then you're yeah, okay, here, let's see.
Add to that because, sorry. Another thing that was concerning is how do we create this system so that it is essentially like strong enough to withstand the legislature? Because what I fear too is that once we bring this to them, we're dealing, you all know Kentucky, we're dealing with a very restrictive, is that a kind way to say it? When we talk about our legislature currently, I'm fearful that we create something, they get their hands on it and break it apart. So I want to create something that is solid and politician proof. Does that make sense?
Ooh, politician proof. That's Dr. Fletcher. Yeah, I was going to say, look, he has his hand up.
Well, and that's one of the things that Representative Bojanowski talked about earlier, is how do you also bring a strong enough system to her colleagues that they also believe in. But I want to talk about something that, to add what Jordan brought out too, even in his own elementary school, and I want to point out May Valley. Over the years, May Valley has been one of the ones that's been at the very top of the testing pyramid, if you will. As a matter of fact, I think once upon a time they might have been the #1 elementary school in the state. But he also shared that their students don't get any social studies content in the 4th grade. It's tested in the 5th grade. So if you move the idea of competency-based social studies and writing into a local accountability model, how can we make sure that with parameters that's being taught throughout? So to me, and going into, I'm sorry, give me your first name again. Trevor and I have spoken a couple times. I apologize, Trevor. With what Trevor was saying too is it seems like we're actually giving more weight, if you will, or more importance to this as a part of a local accountability model. So I think the strong part there is when we go to legislators, we have to emphasize that this is what it looks like in a local accountability model with social studies and writing. And we're not getting away from the civics test. That's still in there. So there's some things in there that we want to make sure we emphasize, because too, we have to make this foolproof. And the other point is, regardless of what we agree on here, it's going to go to the legislature at some point. It's going to go to KBE, then it's going to go to the legislature. And when it comes back out, we want it to look like what we've given to them. James, I saw James giggled over there. But again, to have a very strong representation, a very strong model as we move forward, I think is very important. And going back to how you sell that is how are we incorporating our local communities, how we incorporate our local businesses, how we're using vibrant learning as a means to achieve these goals, I think is a key selling point, if you will. Not just a selling point, it's what we believe in. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that, I think those last points really were very powerful. I was going to make those as well. This idea that I think, and our CIE colleagues always remind me of that in every conversation, this idea that it's really about building trust in local systems, the social change, the social cultural processes, so that you have sufficient buy-in, that you can withstand leadership changes. Leadership changes are tough at every level, right? We had to, whether it's at the school level, at the district level, at the state leader level, it's just tough. Of course, another thing also to do is always, make sure that the assumptions, the principles, the document, that's all like tight, so that at least the system has a little bit more robustness in it. And I want to ask my policy friends in the corner, Lillian, for example, do you have anything? What would you say to that question about, like, what can one do from a policy perspective in order to ensure that sort of transitions can be weathered a little bit? Or do you think that's just something like, that needs to be embraced and policies change and that's part of the process, so to speak? Is there any, and then if you don't want to speak to that, it's fine.
Yeah. So we actually were just having in leadership transitions. So we were actually just having this conversation about the readiness to do this work, recognizing that some areas of the state are ready and some aren't. And what does that mean as we begin to think about this, very emergent window that's coming from a political standpoint that we need to operate around? And some of the conversations that we will be having as we prepare the policy and as a community here will be really informative around is how do we start to think about appropriate phase-ins for this kind of work, right? So it might be that we have on-ramps where those that are ready to do this work can jump right in and can be really helpful guideposts for others in the state, but we might also have a time period of transition where districts can, study and begin to build and pilot. We also need to think about the resources that we're going to have to ask for in order for our communities to be able to have the supports they need to build this, particularly those who are at the very beginning stages. So there are budgetary implications that we're going to need to think through. And then I would say there's also important look-fors that need to be communicated in this work and can even be built into policy conversations to say we would want to see certain things in place before we would move to the next level of implementation of this work. So sometimes people think of policies as very simple, maybe one line in a bill, but you actually can be really thoughtful in the way you design policies to address a lot of these considerations.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have time for one more, and then I need to wrap this up. Susan, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just going to talk on behalf of our table. One of the things, Andre, you asked about what needed to be true. Yeah. Our conversations went more toward the through course, just with some need for clarification. So the conversations we talked about were, when we look through the data, lots of themes around actionable and timely and those kinds of things. But what we wondered, what are the federal requirements for adaptive systems and diagnostic systems and criterion-based systems and all of those things that we would need some clarification on. The other part of that is to be careful as we are saying that we're going to reduce the footprint of assessment. We are saying federal, but we need to make sure we're taking into account all of the assessments that are required that aren't even a part of the state accountability system. For instance, we have kindergarten grants testing, we have MTSS types of things, the things that are in legislation now around literacy and numeracy, how many times we're giving these through course. So I think really, we pulled up some charts of all the different kinds of assessments we have. So I think we just need to be careful when we're creating these new assessment types that we are was it where Tracy this morning talking about what are we throwing in the pan and burning a little bit so that we can move this forward. So that was just some things we needed clarification on.
That's so valuable, right? I mean, this idea of like everybody needs to be, even in a moment when a specific problem is being worked at, most of the time you need to be a systems thinker and really add these additional considerations to really make sure you don't have any blind spots. And districts, for example, there's often a lot of value where individual districts, I'm sure some of you have done this, is like to do sort of like, for example, an assessment system review, right? Just whether you want to call that an audit or just a reflection where your staff members engage in seeing what assessments do we have? Are they all necessary? Are we using them for the appropriate purposes, and so on and so forth? And the state has to do that as well. And you know, the other part about this, I'm just quickly mention, is also, you talked about like, you know, the essentially looking at the instruments and then, you know, from K through 12, really, like where they're being used, but it's also then the additional stuff, like the work that goes into teacher professionalization, the work that is at the time that's being spent in classrooms and all of that. So like switching out an assessment, like one for the other, has a lot of subtle and indirect and sort of like secondary implications. So, and I think that's also really important. So I think that's great. Lou, did you want to say something? Oh, no, you can make a comment. Do you want to comment? I do. There you go.
I learned from you that I think goes in aligns with this and some of Alfonso's concerns and others that we have heard, is that as a team, we need to be really sensitive to the unintended consequence, the consequential nature of high stakes assessment and accountability on the individual it affects. So from every learner to every family to the school system to educators, et cetera. And so our team often talks about doing a pre-mortem. I think we're at too large a grain size now, but when we get to another grain size in this, as a team, I think we really have to play out what are the potential pre-mortem impacts, the unintended consequences, and, you know, be really smart about 30 years of top-down education reform and what we know does and doesn't work. Because I've heard a lot of horror stories today of things that we have learned over time. We've just got to make sure we implement them. And I think I'll toss it to Gretchen.
You can get the mic here. I'm coming over. Oh, there you go.
I can have two mics. So I did some interviews with folks in advance of this meeting, trying to get kind of feedback on these different ideas. And in conversation with Daniel, a student, about this, he pointed out one of those unintended consequences in a different area that, like, I didn't anticipate at all. So we're talking about collecting VLE data to just figure out like participation rates in VLE and what might be an unintended consequence. And he said, well, I imagine the people who might end up having to collect that data are counselors. If it's counselors who have to collect that data, then the kids who are most in need of help in the school will actually have access to less help because they're the people collecting that data, right? So there is this stuff, you're right, Lou, that's like granular, that can really matter in terms of the lived impact it would have on the learners we are saying we are designing this for.
Oh, wait, I'm coming back.
Carefully about the whole system. As that grain size gets smaller and smaller, then I think we have to be really, really smart and open up these broad conversations, because you could have told Jean Wilhoit and me 35 years ago that people would stop teaching social studies at 4th grade, and we would have said, no way. Who would do that? Well, look across the state.
And it's also, yeah. I can't throw the microphones over the different table. That's so good. But yeah, and you know, it's also often easy to say like, hey, would you be willing to trade X in for Y? And people go like, sure. But then you say, well, to your point, like, here's what that means. Here's what I really mean by this. It means that we have to do this, and you have to give up that. Here's how your practices would change. Here's the information that you would lose. Here's what you would gain. Now, let me ask you the question again. Would you be willing to trade in X for Y? And many people then change their minds because they're like, oh, shoot, I hadn't really thought about all of that, right? And so that idea, and that's our job as sort of like leaders and the department and other people like to say like, hey, let's think this really through and mock it up, play it out. I think that's really great. I was told I need to wrap it up. I get hand signals over here to wrap things up, but not before I tell you that you should please give your feedback to KDE on 2 questions using the Mentimeter. Let's look at them together. Concerning the assessment session data presentation discussion, I feel We're just waiting to see that the needle moves in the direction that we hope. No, that's not true. That's not true. We're just seeing how many people have responded. Are we good? You want to do the next one? Does anybody else need some time to respond to this question? Hands up. No? Okay, good. Let's do the next one. So that's the end. So that's very much in the middle. I'm sure that means if I asked you, I'm sure it means there were a bunch of questions. There's some things I want to talk about more, right? All right, next one. What do we have? And let's actually finish that sentence a little bit. So in order for me to feel more confident, and my question was in what, right? So I think, how would, is that a question for Jennifer or Karen? What would you like to be in that? Confident in order for me to feel more confident in?
I would say in these assessment change ideas, right? We talked about a number of them, but feel more confident about that group of ideas that we've just been focusing on.
At a conceptual level, do I agree? All right. So there we go. In order for me to feel more confident in these conceptual assessment change ideas, I would need and I think it's also actually moving forward in that direction that is currently indicated, right? Not that this is final as is, but this idea of should we be thinking more about social studies and writing and its role and the replacement of interim assessment or state assessments and blah, 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 all of that. Oh. Jennifer and I were just told that it's like little kids, we can let you go on break once you're done. It's recess, yay. Please give the answers to this. Do we have, should we look at what the patterns? 11 responses, 12, okay. All right, we'll process this after the break. Jennifer, do you want to say anything else? During the break, we'll see what you write.
Yeah, we'll look at it. And thank you very much for the conversations. As you can tell, these are deep, complex ideas that we're discussing, and we're just trying to get, again, that directional space so that we can move forward with this. So when you're finished, please have a break and be back at about 2:35. Okay, see you back at 2:35. Okay, we ready? Come back together. Thank you. We're going to get started on the state accountability session. So the previous conversation was about assessments, and although that assessments are related to accountability, they are intertwined, they are different. And we're going to talk about this afternoon, state assessment particularly, and then tomorrow morning we'll dive into federal accountability. Now, one piece that you will not see in the version 4.0 in the discussion here is about the difference between change by indicator and individual student growth. So we have already good agreement on that change being in the model, removing the change element from the current system and moving to an individual student growth. So that is going to be in the next version. Okay, so you won't see that here because we already have that full agreement.
To add to that, I testified in front of IJCE, which is the Interim Joint Commission on Education, with Senate and House last week. Golly, that was last Tuesday. And the question was asked to me twice, how can we help you move to that model, to growth? So that's already in the queue, if you will, for our legislators. It's already on their radar because I told them that 92% of the people were in favor of that. So we got some good data there to move forward.
So looking at the state accountability, it's going to be a little different from what we talked about this morning. So this morning we were all about local accountability, the agency around locals deciding what they hold themselves accountable to, being able to work with their districts and their communities, their local schools, their students, their stakeholders, talking about local. This part is the contrast of that. This is about state accountability and the responsibility that the state would have holding our schools and districts accountable for those quality measures. So this is a little different in the application of it. So in version 4.0, we have an accreditation style model. So an accreditation style model is something that in the state we have at the collegiate level. We have some districts that have gone through accreditation for their local purposes, but elevating that to a state application that would emphasize transparency, continuous improvement, where schools and districts would then collect evidence. They would provide evidence based on quality expectations that the state would then have input on. We would bring together educators and develop domains on which we would want to hold schools accountable for. Local stakeholders would then help develop those quality standards, develop rubrics, and then the schools would rate themselves against those rubrics or those frameworks. They would provide evidence that they're meeting those domains. Some possible domains could be academic outcomes, vibrant learning experiences, teacher leadership, and so forth. So that submission of evidence would be given to an external evaluator who would then make some determinations on that for continuous improvement. Now, the ability to get there, again, 4.0 has a flight path toward the state moving toward an accreditation style. And I will note for you that this would take a lot of capacity building. It would take a lot of demonstration to move toward this through providing evidence that the state could do it in a quality manner. So the idea of getting to all the domains of an accreditation style system would first, we could start with one indicator. One indicator that could possibly be the vibrant learning experiences, develop the standards of quality, those rubrics. We would work with districts who would pilot it and demonstrate that this could be done. Then as the evidence expands, we could move toward a whole system that could be then the accreditation style if we were able to demonstrate that it could be attained and administered. Okay, so the idea here is moving the whole system toward an accreditation style. And again, that's a far expanse from where we were this morning. Okay, just want to make that distinction. Okay, so we have assessment data. We have not only do we have the respondents to the survey, but as Leslie said this morning, we have the data from the survey, and this is 4.0, but we also have the qualitative data that we brought together, those 36 districts, as well as the capacity in the survey that was also. So there's more data here than just 467 respondents. We have also the focus groups as well. And Abby is going to present that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abigail Jacob. If I haven't had a chance to say hello to you yet, I'm another strategic data analyst along with Leslie McKinney, who you've already heard present here at KDE. You've seen this already, but we're going to just briefly go through this. I will try to be as quick as possible because I know we're running a little bit long. This is another section of our survey that we did about just under 650 respondents discussing state accountability. So first, overall, there was strong support. About 61% of our total respondent group supports adopting a state indicator within state accountability that measures access to vibrant learning experience. It is, in other words, that measures the percentage of students that have access to or participate in vibrant learning experiences, as opposed to quality of vibrant learning experiences based on rubrics. Support was strongest among educators, DACs, and district administrators, but we have fairly good agreement overall. Overall, should Kentucky move towards an accreditation style accountability model where schools submit evidence of quality to an external evaluator? Out of our respondents, 55% said yes. Overall, should we adopt an accreditation style model for the state's accountability system alongside the basic requirements needed to meet federal law? 63% of our respondents support yes, we do want to move towards an accreditation style accountability model for our statewide model. Strongest support among community members, but support was strong among districts and school level staff as well. So types of vibrant learning experiences. We have several options here, but support was strong for all of them. Personalized learning pathways, work-based learning experiences, service-based learning experiences. All of our respondents were very much in favor of those, as well as student capstone projects, student defenses of learning, and student-led conferences. There is also still support, 63% support for another locally proposed and state-approved options. So there is flexibility for districts here. 3/4 of our respondents are in favor of adopting a local accountability system that includes a lot of different factors, such as perhaps broader school improvement efforts, vibrant learning experiences, parental and community engagement, and other non-academic factors as well. 75% of our total respondent groups support that. There's also widespread support for discarding the current color rating system, particularly among professionals in the education field. We have 77% of all our respondents support discarding the current color rating system. So we did have some opportunities for open-ended responses as well. I won't read that whole quote there, but that is a direct quote from our respondents. You can see there's a lot of really good, rich information there. Overall, respondents cited, unsurprisingly, districts are going to need funding and support to provide greater access to vibrant learning experiences. Teachers are also going to need rich professional development to understand and be able to create those experiences for their students. There's also widespread support for a rubric and exemplars of VLE so that schools and districts have a basis that they can work from when they're creating these experiences and tailoring them for their students. We also may need additional staff and teachers, not just teachers, but maybe potentially additional specialized staff to work with our communities as we create things like service-based or work-based vibrant learning experiences. Districts are going to want rich curriculum supported materials so that they can provide those high quality learning experiences for their students. And also, we're going to need community and stakeholder buy-in, not just from leadership in the education field, but also from our local communities as we transition to this new model that in many cases will work with our communities in a whole new way. Additionally, many respondents, and we've talked about this already, but many respondents did use this section to express some concern that that all districts aren't equal, and that it may be a little more difficult for our smaller and more rural districts to provide the same level of breadth and access to vibrant learning experiences as our larger districts. If you look in your blue packet, all of this data analysis, including a sampling of our open-ended responses, is available inside of your blue packet. We did kind of cull the responses just to reduce redundancy, but there is quite a few in there, and you will see that that is a very broad sample of all the respondents that we get in. All right, Sarah?
And similarly, again, thinking through our focus group with those 36 districts, again, crossing from students to superintendents to community members to parents and beyond, we saw some themes that also resonated across survey data. So thinking about how do we mitigate some of our concerns around the subjectivity of vibrant learning experiences. So a lot of participants across stakeholder group in our focus group with those 36 districts expressed having clear expectations, common rubrics, wanting to really see a collaborative effort put around some rigorous guardrails, if you will, on what's expected of every district. There were also some equity concerns, again, as Abby just mentioned, thinking about how do we design for differences between districts, in particular resources and access to things within their community that would give them the ability to ensure that students have equitable opportunities to access vibrant learning experiences in those communities. And then lastly, we heard across stakeholders this real desire for time to calibrate to a new system in that way, and really just again, those on-ramps, as Lillian mentioned. What does this look like to have fair access to on-ramps into this if we are not quite there yet? So you see some sampling quotes there at the bottom that reflect some of those larger trends. If you look at pages 10 and on through your packet as well, you'll see the breakdown by stakeholder group, some of those more granular themes that arose. I heard someone earlier say, I want to see more from students. That, as an example, is a set of data in here, and you can see some direct quotes from those student groups as well as others. Oh, did want to mention also, because that sneaky little local accountability question does come into the state section. Here you can see, again, some of the trends across stakeholder groups. A lot of positivity for the possibility and what is seen through genuine, authentic community engagement and investment in school systems when local accountability is on the table. We also, again, heard challenges and consistency. So how do you ensure quality across districts while maintaining local autonomy? And that desire, again, to be flexible versus standardized in our approach. And that for you as well is in your pink packet from this morning. So if you go looking for that local accountability data, you'll have to return to your pink.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Abby, for that. The data. Okay, so very similar to what we did with assessments, we're going to ask you to talk at your tables. We're going to ask you to look at the data and see what it says in comparison to what you first thought. We need your reaction and we need your general direction on a direction to go with our state accountability. Looking at those vibrant learning experiences, looking at the accreditation style, change of colors from the color system and so forth. What does need to be true to you to implement this type of system? What are your reactions? What are things that need to be changed or may not have been included in that you would like to take forward? Okay. Okay, and Susan.
Thank you. Just to add one thought before you go into your table discussions, there's this idea of local accountability and state accountability in this table discussion. And one way you might think about it is sort of what is the role of the state in sort of authorizing or regulating or reviewing local systems, right? This accreditation style system is one way to do it. What is the role for the state that makes sense for us to support these vibrant learning experiences and support these good practices happening across on the ground across the Commonwealth? What should the state have as a non-negotiable that all districts must be doing this and here's how we're going to know, versus what needs to be left up for local autonomy? I think that's one of the key questions that we sort of need clarity on before we can move from the prototype into a model to bring to the legislature. How much time do we have? Okay, so does that include the share out though, Karen? Okay, so until 3:30, so we have about 40 minutes to process this. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take some time now to process the discussion at your tables. Who's been a teacher? I was a teacher. I was a terrible teacher. If you can hear me, clap once. Oh, beautiful. Awesome. All right, so we're going to be just processing together what you were discussing at your table. And to remind you, we're going to have that question at the end of this session again. Sort of what's your temperature on these ideas? What would need to be true in order for you to move forward? Moving from a prototype 4.0 to some sort of potential model that we could take forward to the legislature. Where did you land on this question of the accreditation style system in state accountability? Any brave souls to start us off? Thank you, Gretchen.
So when I first joined, we were kind of in separate conversations when we came together. When I first joined, the conversation was a lot about that the how of this is very important, talking about accreditation style stuff in particular, like who is this external review team and how will they be trained and how will we know who's coming? And over our conversation, this thing about how got even sharper to actually mirroring some of the concerns that were shared over here about like, we're having these ideas that are meant to be things that inspire changes in schooling. But when you plug those into a culture that is a compliance culture, what do they do with that thing? And that led us to this other question, which is like, how might we design any of these ideas, right? Accreditation being one of them, but any other thing. How might we design them in such a way that it challenges compliance culture?
Brilliant. Donnie.
Something that looking at the data sprung out to me or like it triggered something for me that, some of the things that we're trying to solve for, like the compliance thing that Gretchen was just talking about, gaming the system, kind of quiet rejection and rebellion, minimal compliance. Those things are all social. They are social processes. It's the conversation in the parking lot. It's the text chain that starts after a webinar. It's these people learn these behaviors socially. But the converse is also true, that people learn how to commit and do things well and like calibrate and get energized by things also through social processes. And I think another thing that we're sort of fighting against though is that right now, most state agencies are the middle of that hub. Everything flows in and out through the department. And that's maybe not how people learn how to do stuff all the time, right? Like if you think about all three of the presentations, they learned that from listening to another district, or they like got connected through some sort of social network usually. And I think that if we want to get to real accountability that doesn't feel compliancy and doesn't feel gameable, then we're going to have to think about that social infrastructure for how people really hold each other accountable and get away from some of the compliance stuff that we kind of get stuck in.
Really thoughtful. Thank you, Gretchen and Donnie. If we are going to start from that orientation, from thinking about what we heard this morning, what we valued and appreciated about what we heard this morning, and put on our state hat role, think about then what role can the state play in spreading vibrant learning experiences across the state through assessment and accountability? What could the state then therefore support or assure, require to help districts along those paths, right? I heard at some tables people were saying, well, you've got to require that they're at least reporting on social studies and writing if we're going to get rid of that statewide. Other tables I heard, oh, we've got to require that districts are engaging in a legitimate community-centered process where they're engaging in conversations with their communities in order to design these local systems. The state accreditation style is another way. That's another way the state could engage in this role. It could say, well, we're going to require that you definitely have vibrant learning experiences, and you're going to submit evidence relative to those, and peers are going to come in and look at that evidence and help validate your ratings. Where did you all land on this state role? What is the right role for the state here in supporting these good practices? I can.
So the table I was sitting at talked a lot about supporting and connecting districts to one another as shared learners as appropriate role for the state, amongst other things, but that was, I think, a theme. Also, the state could be in a position to offer sort of clear definitions and to try to bolster the system relative to those concerns that I think we saw some in the data regarding like subjectivity of an accreditation style system. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge we talked a fair bit about the potential for existing requirements within sort of the state system to be more coherent with whatever kind of system we all recommend and moves forward. So I'll be more specific there. Think about the CSIPs or the CDIPs that districts and schools have to submit already. Those are very compliance focused on indicators within the federal accountability system. What if the structures and the focus of that system was framed more around the new versus the sort of compliance indicators? More coherence, hopefully.
Thank you, Laura.
Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. So a question, I keep hearing this idea come up, and I don't want to take credit for it necessarily, but I'm hearing a lot of need for there to be some fleshed out models so that people can really, like, not necessarily more surveys and things at this point, but really getting a sense of, we had like 3 or so different scenarios of what exactly this would look like so that people can really get in the weeds in terms of the impact, the pluses and the minuses of each, but also like what is a realistic time frame from each? What would have to go into each one? What comes off the plate with each one? Mm-hmm. And really thinking about the practicality of each one and the impact of each one so that we can better prepare and have more informed decisions about what would really be proposed moving forward and what we would be even advocating for.
Absolutely. Yep, that's exactly right. So that's the next step, Suzanne. I think what we're trying to get a sense of in each of the structured conversations today is directionally this idea of an accreditation style system. Does that feel like something we should continue to pursue? Should it show up in a model? And should we then take those steps to unpack what does that mean? What's the policy landscape? What are the implementation considerations in that? And so that's why we wanted to bring you all together. Now that we have this data, that we've gone through a series of prototypes, this idea of accreditation style accountability, is it something we feel comfortable potentially moving forward with to that model phase? Yes, in the back.
So when looking at the data, I noticed that the questions that noted data review by an external evaluator got much lower scores, especially from superintendents and DACs. So to me, that kind of said something. And I'm wondering, maybe that wording is a little scary to people. And maybe that we should consider defining or giving examples of what we mean by an external evaluator and
Yeah,
making that term
absolutely.
less scary.
Brilliant. So in the prototypes, we sort of suggest 3 ways that that could play out. So it could either be a community of peers, so district leaders and educators, community members from neighboring districts coming in and reviewing your evidence in sort of a peer review process. It could be the state agency that sort of manages that process more centrally, or it could be sort of contracted out with sort of third-party vendors, and maybe there's a list of vendors that your district chooses from. From what I've heard this morning and in the conversation, this idea of networking and creating communities of practice around these ideas has been resonating. Maybe it's organized or facilitated by the co-ops, arranging community neighboring partnerships. And I think you're absolutely right. Had we phrased that question a different way, we probably would have gotten a different response, or maybe would have. Yeah. In the back over, Lillian.
Yeah, I just wanted to share back to your question of how this particular table is thinking about the state capacity piece for an accreditation-like system. And one of the things that we had talked about is it might not need to be set up in a way where every single school or every single district is going through it every year. There might need to be some decision rules that are set. It might be that you want to do it more frequently for schools that are identified under the federal system, or maybe there are certain indicators that the state decides if a particular school has fallen below a particular threshold in this area, that might expedite the timeline for more intensive review and supports. So that was definitely one of the things that we had thought a little bit about. And I also wanted to share this piece about superintendents came up as well for being reporting pretty low, and that actually led us to wonder if superintendents may not have fully understood what was meant by the concept of accreditation-like, because they were scoring pretty high on the idea of getting rid of the color coding system. They were scoring pretty high on being in favor of local accountability, but then there were many that were abstaining from answering in terms of like whether we want to move to accreditation-like systems. So that led us to believe that maybe they weren't sure what was meant by that. Mm-hmm. So we have more work to do to explain what that could look like.
Thank you, Lillian. Edna, in the back.
Oh, I might be kind of off base here, but I keep thinking about a quote that Susan introduced me to. Susan's gritting her teeth. It's progress, and I may be misquoting it, but something about progress moves at the speed of trust. And I think that the L3s, I think, have felt a lot of trust put into them. And so, they may not be moving at the speed of light, but they feel like this is ours. We're really making this local. And maybe what the superintendents were thinking, well, I thought this was going to be local, and now you're going to do an accreditation process on top of that. So there might be this feeling of, are we really doing local, or am I just pretending like we're doing local? So I don't know how that fits in, but I think we need to think about it. And something Susan talked about, the 3 models. We were talking about how oftentimes engineers, when they have a project, they'll say, okay, you go out and you come up with a solution, and your group's going to come up with one, and yours, and then we're all going to come together and examine them and think, like Susan said very eloquently. But another piece of that could be the timeline, and what are the little pieces that we can pull out of those models and begin to implement to gain trust and shift culture so that it doesn't feel like such a big load all at once. So I kind of like the idea of looking at various models and for us to kind of peel out, which of these things are really doable, what are we going to have to give up, and so forth. And we may be looking at a long timeline, but if it changes things for the better in the long run, so be it. Yeah.
Just going back to the question you asked, Susan, about other things the state can do, picking up on some other things in our conversation. The state can facilitate network learning, which has come up in a lot of other places. So I will say ×2 from our table on that idea. The state also, in doing that networking, can gather up and lift up stories of strong things. Like so-and-so has XYZ measure. Their community really values that measure. It's really increasing trust in that community. Hey, other folks, maybe you want to learn about this measure, right? And that there's some way for the state to do that that's like incredibly normal and legitimate to do those things. And that also the state's in a position to do matchmaking, right? Like, oh, you're into that measure? Hey, these guys down the road have a really good example of that thing you might want. So if you are the entity that organizes network learning among communities, you are also the entity that can do matchmaking between individual communities. And then last thing is just, if you're doing those things, it also gives the department a role to play that, at least when I was at my department, I wanted desperately to play whenever I could, which was bearer of good news. Like the department then is getting a sort of steady stream of stories from communities around the state about the things their communities love about their schools. You know, and if there's like a little component on a dashboard, I know we're going to get to reporting later, it's in our agenda, but if there's like a place in there where everybody can put something that they think is awesome, it doesn't matter if that's comparable. And there's no chance for gaming that, because it's just like, it's the place for celebrating whatever's awesome in your local community. And it's pretty nice for your department to be able to be like, you know what, you got a thing and it's awesome.
To go back to the questions around accreditation, I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of the superintendents, but I will say I focus grouped them and have talked to a number of them. I think there's a history in Kentucky of program reviews and other type of external review processes that people maybe saw some value in, but felt very externally focused. It felt like you were proving yourself to someone external to you. It's a really different orientation to say, I would like to invite people in to help me do a better job at this thing that my local community cares deeply about. I think that might have been some of the difference in the questions around external accreditation style process, but there was enthusiasm in the superintendents I've talked to about going to learn from other districts and having other folks come and inform your own thing. So I think it's going to be important for us when we move to decisions about what we move forward. It's going to be important for us to say, here are the lessons that we've learned from the past. So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We're taking the things that were valuable to people in that old system and learning from the mistakes that were made and iterating to a better version. The same thing is true with student portfolios, right? There was a history in Kentucky of writing portfolios. Some good came from it, but then people had really hard questions about it. So going back to Green Up's, fire in the pan, I think we need to create some really visible, transparent, and trustworthy version of these are the things that we're going to do better this time in a new system. I think that would help a lot with the enthusiasm around this. So.
One thing that just real quick, our table spent a fair amount of time, I would say, Delaney, right, talking about was the difference on page 2 between access and quality for the Vibrant Learning Indicator. And I think, if you want to add anything to this, but I think the general gist of our conversation was it felt like access might not be the most meaningful indicator, since by virtue of doing a system with more vibrant learning experiences, access would be an inherent part of that. And also that would be a bit easier to game. And then we, of course, got into the nuts and bolts of, okay, what does it mean to have more of a quality indicator for VLE? But just sharing that perspective around the access piece. Do you want to add anything there?
Thank you, John. Yeah, so the current flight path, as Jennifer laid out, that it leads with the access indicator, which is sort of like the percentage of students who've participated in one or more of these vibrant learning experiences versus the full accreditation style system that's more, here's our evidence that supports the quality of the vibrant learning that's happening in our district, and which would be just a different style indicator. Other comments on your discussion? Oh, thank you.
I just want to double down on the
communication of stories. I think that that could be a huge role that KDE plays for the districts, is telling like a campaign of changing the narrative around education. That could really be owned by KDE. And I know that KDE does different things like submit your stories, but that's the work is still on the districts and the schools. And usually it's just being communicated to other districts and schools. It's the public narrative that we really need to help inform. And that could be KDE going out to the schools and videoing it and capturing that story and having just a robust like communications team out there telling the stories. I think that would help with the mindset shift of what we mean by learning and schools for the community without like a metric that now schools have to align to. So I love that you brought the storytelling up. KDE should feel like our district's #1 cheerleader. They should be telling all of the great stories.
Yeah, that really stuck out to me in this morning's presentations with the local accountability systems and just sort of how the work that they're doing, each of these 3 counties with their communities, has to be establishing public trust and reestablishing public trust in the public education system. And that alone seems really worth the effort. Yeah. Yes.
I'd like to piggyback on what you said. If Dr. Fletcher has in him the willingness and the energy to do a commissioner's tour, like what started all this job, the Kentucky United We Learn Council, that tour, even the one that was made in Spanish to connect to all the Spanish speakers here in Kentucky, that made a huge difference. I wonder if we could go in that direction again, not only just to educate, but also to hear those stories that maybe they are not coming to us for whatever reasons, right? So.
So is it my turn to close down, or what? How are we doing on time? Oh, as far as the state accountability portion? Okay, do have 2 questions as it relates to state accountability. You can answer those, please. Want to do a little bit of reflection now. If we could have a seat, please. Again, shouldn't have to just take real quick to thank people. You know, hey, look, we appreciate you. Sit down. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, and this next section is it's really about. I'm going to ask you to bear with the commissioner for just a second. I'm glad somebody didn't put thought partnering with the superintendent up there as opposed to the commissioner. I'm very encouraged by a lot of the discussions that happened today, and not just encouraged, enthused. But allow me just for a brief few moments to present a loose framework and say what if for just a second. The very first question that comes to mind is, why do we have to have a state accountability model? We don't have to. Okay. So in listening to what I heard today is, well, then that means we're going to have what looks like possibly a federal accountability model and maybe local accountability. Maybe. I don't know. Just me thinking out loud for a second. So I want to take a little bit of time and I'll tell you why that I really hesitate to look at state accountability, because if we talk about vibrant learning and we make that part of the state accountability system, then all of a sudden we start talking about comparability. Then all of a sudden we start talking about how do you take a subjective model and start gaming. And I don't think that's our goal. That's not our goal. What I've heard from each of you is, how do we set up networks to support each other, to lift each other up and push each other farther. So just for a second, let's talk a little bit about what about local accountability for a second, okay? And I took some notes last night, and I also took some notes today. What if we look at certain parameters, and again, you've heard this conversation today, it's not anything that's new. What if we set up parameters for what vibrant learning looks like, such as personalized learning pathways, work-based learning experiences, service-based learning experiences, student capstones, student defenses of learning, student-led conferences, or maybe we just look at more that vibrant learning may be a tool to accomplish what we're looking at in a local accountability. What if we develop a model that allows 171 different local accountability models? And then what we do is we take districts that are working on this together already and identify these are the positives, these are the exemplars that's going on in a district. For example, this district has a process for collaborating with the community that we would want to put on a pedestal at the state level to celebrate. Or maybe this district uses an indicator that talks about student well-being, and we want to elevate that so that others can see that same process, that same type of metric, indicator, however you want to call it. But going back to that local accountability model, what if we allow each district, we trust them to develop, we provide support, and when I say we, I'm talking about KDE, but also to our co-ops, also to other districts. What if we look at ways to pair districts that are very similar in geographically, economically, the resources that they have, to have them work together to help develop each local accountability models with each other? They don't have to have the same local accountability model. But you know what? Menifee is a lot like Owsley County. How are they collaborating with their community, and how can I learn from that? They're also doing this type of metric that I want to look at. For example, I go back to Logan County with student well-being. And this is a great metric here of student well-being. So what if we put out rubrics as KDE, and we talk about these are the things that we expect in a local accountability model overall? Do we expect vibrant learning? I'll talk about social studies and writing in just a second. Or these are other things we expect in a local accountability model, and then we provide the supports to help develop those, whether it be developing a porch for the learner, whether it be developing a dashboard, helping districts put together collaboration with communities. And then we partner them with other districts for over maybe a 3-year period to develop their own local accountability system. And you have critical friends now. The same groups that are just like you coming in to say, okay, these are some things that we think you're trying to measure this. Critical friends coming in to say, okay, you are doing a great job, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Maybe there's some things missing based on the rubric that we have, our parameters. We could say parameters, rubric. And then we're all on the same page with this is what we expect from a local accountability system. And then every third year, on a rotational basis, every third year, maybe we have that outside partner, that outside organization, that outside entity that comes in and uses the same rubric to say, you know what, these are the parts of this local accountability model which are exemplars for the whole state. And then there's validity from that external person coming in to evaluate. That's your accreditation style, if you will. So you've got critical partners along the way for 3 years that's helping you build that local accountability system and helping you find out what exactly does your community expect? What exactly is the growth that you want to see? And that's the other thing too. Make sure that your local accountability system measures growth. Because you're at 100% in some area, you probably don't need to be that on your accountability measure. You need to look at something that has growth, that assigns with a CSIP, CDIPs in your district, then all of a sudden everything's aligned going one way. And then as KDE, as was pointed out, and I love that, these are the exemplars when it comes to collaboration with communities. These are exemplars as it relates to vibrant learning. These are exemplars. And again, I'm not giving someone a rating, and I'm not saying their entire accountability system is exemplar, but these are parts that I think other districts should look at to say, you know what, maybe we can learn from that. But also in that 3-year process, you also have people that are sharing ideas, that are lifting each other up. And if you put vibrant learning, in my opinion, into a state accountability system, then all of a sudden it's a competition. But if it's within that local accountability system, then maybe we're going to learn from each other. Now, that goes to just a very broad look of what the importance of local accountability. And I'll tell you something that I picked up today, and I tried to take some notes. I didn't have this in my notes, and I don't know why I did. You may want to fire me as commissioner, but how does this align with the strategic plan? Instead of just looking at just math and reading, which we think is important, we know is important, but you know what? We may have a focus in on making sure that our English language learners are meeting these type of expectations as we move forward. That might be one of the goals, because if you look at, what was it? I think it was Warren County that gave a statistic the other day that 1/3 of their students are English language learners. 1/3. So that better be a priority for that district. How do we meet their needs? That's going to be a part of our local accountability, I would assume. Again, I don't want to put words into Warren County's mouth or anything, but you're going to identify growth. I really like the idea of performance level assessments being a part of local accountability. But what if, let's say, social studies? Okay, we're still talking local accountability for right now. What if districts aren't ready for that performance level event, that performance level type of competency-based assessment? What if the state provided a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, all the way to 11th grade social studies test? You can use that in your local accountability, or you can develop your own performance level assessment or competency-based assessment, I'm sorry. So if you're not ready, maybe we help out from a state level of saying, we've got the test here for you, but you know what? If you want to look at a great competency-based assessment, let's go to Shelby County and look at what they're doing and provide examples of that. So again, given options. Again, I think that's one way to go into our legislature and say, hey, look, we think social studies is very important, and we do. So much so, this is the type of data that we're going to provide to districts. Now, I'm not saying that we should account that. Step out for just a second. Let's look at the federal accountability side. And you're going to see things tomorrow that'll talk a little more about, I think, through course assessments. I think there's some different things that are on the agenda tomorrow. But unfortunately, we still have to do CSI, TSI, ATSI, and things of that nature. So let's just use the federal part to do that. Look at math and reading. Look at science. Now, you could say we could also add in transition readiness and graduation rate if you wanted to do that. But let's strip down the federal requirements to take away the social studies, the writing, then how do we incorporate writing to performance level? Because you can't be a good communicator unless you're able to write well. What does that look like within a district? How are you showing that performance level? How are you showing that students are being good writers? How are they following the content, where it's incorporated? Now, Dr. Garland and I also had a great conversation, I believe. I hope Dr. Garland agrees. DJJ could develop their own portrait of the learner, their own local accountability model, and then that follows that student wherever it goes, and then the federal accountability is just wherever that student's accountability falls in. And there's some things that have to be massaged there, but still yet you have a local accountability model that would follow that child wherever they are within a district from the DJJ perspective. So with that being said, what if we step back for just a second and look at federal accountability, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I can't take credit for that. I wish I could. That came from Lou. I wish she's in the room. She'd been proud of me. But I will also say this, and this is one part that I really struggle with in the competency-based assessment when it comes to math and reading. There's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to competency-based assessments. How fair is it to tell a district you're in the bottom 5% based on, and again, I understand that you can come up with excellent rubrics, and states have done that. But we're so, in this state, we're so grounded into, you know, what does a test look like? We're compliant. I do believe that it'd be very difficult for me to say we need to move into a competency-based system with math and reading. I'm just being open and honest with you, because I would struggle with putting a district in the bottom 5%. And then also, too, we want to make sure that we're still doing those investments. We're going to ask the legislature for more money in literacy, more money in numeracy, because we believe that's a crux to our work. We have to make sure our kids are ready for that, and also in science. So we've got federal accountability here, and you can rank that however you want. But you know, one thing I want you to notice, after we did our press release on state accountability, how many times have you heard about it in the last week? It's almost like it's just gone. But how much would you think that people would talk about their local accountability system, especially if you're adding data on a quarterly basis? And one of the things, and again, going back to what does it mean for an accreditation style model, and I think that even Fleming County already had kind of incorporated that. They had other districts to look at their model and say, what's wrong with it? What type of changes do we need? And they listened. And then they had that outside, and I can't remember what was the group that they used. Anybody remember? They had an outside vendor, essentially, or outside group that came. Was it Cognia? I thought it was something. Okay, Cognia. I'll take your word for it. So if Cognia came in and evaluated that system to say, okay, these are things that are your next steps. But again, from a KDE perspective, we're not looking at ranking. I mean, we're going to do what federally we're required to do. But what if we look at that local accountability, say, you know what? Shelby County is telling their story in a beautiful way. Let's look at their accountability model in these aspects, and these are exemplars based on 3 years of work with other districts and that external reviewer. And we can pick out parts that we want to point other districts to. And you know what? The only people that are being compared is the district with itself. Did we improve? Did we move forward? And are we giving the improvement data on what is important locally? There's an accreditation there of sorts. But we're not asking for how you do that. We want to trust districts to go forward. So if you know, for those of us that are Republicans, and I probably shouldn't say that out loud, with a bunch of educators especially, we're going to trust but verify. We're going to trust that districts are willing to push together an accountability system. We're going to be here to help them develop. We're going to be here to help them implement. We're going to give them support, but we're also going to verify at the end by actually saying these are exemplars throughout this model. Do you want me to talk about Amendment 2 real quick? I'm going to vote no, by the way. I'm sorry. I just thought I'd throw that out there. But that being said, think about that. Let that simmer. See what your thoughts are. Tear it apart. Build it up, because we got a lot of work to do tomorrow also too. So with that being said, not looking for any type of input at this time, but I want you to be able to think about that overnight. Okay? What does that look like? How do we lift each other up? And then most importantly, to build a prosperous Kentucky, would that be a meaningful system, a meaningful accountability system for every single one? Something to think about. I think, Jim, you're up to close, my friend. Yeah, I think you are. All right, I'm sorry. Any questions for me? I said I was going to close here, but any questions for me? We could. You know, who exactly? I think what it should be is that that KDE would have those approved lists of the external. That we would select those probably through an RFP process or looking through an RFA, RFP process of how do we do that. Yeah. So yes, I think there should be external, but I think they should also use the same rubrics that are being used by the partners through those 3 years. So there's no surprises. Yeah. Great question. Others? Did I load too much on you real quickly there? I really believe that with some of the things that I heard today, I think I just repeated some of the things that were said today. Okay. Dr. Flynn.
Well, I'll tell you, I almost want to just give him a mic drop. What do y'all think? I mean, I'm ready to go and make this happen. What about you all? You know, it is a little bit challenging to think about what happens next and what are we going to have by the end of tomorrow. But I hope we have at least the beginnings of a framework that we can all get behind. You know, and when I start thinking about what can be, you know, and thinking about what Commissioner Fletcher's talking about with a, you know, with a federal minimum, you know, that gets at those kind of statewide non-negotiables to make sure those things happen across the state, but then pushing almost everything else to the local community, but thinking about that in a way that's going to produce agency, engagement, empowerment among our students, educators, and communities. When I was a superintendent, I probably shared this with you, I used to remind our community all the time that it gets the schools it wants, but they have to be with us. They have to have high expectations and be willing to invest their time and resources to help us do what we want. But how do we get that done? It's when they feel like they have a way to influence what happens for our students, and that our kids are part of that conversation, and our families are part of that conversation, our employers are. And thinking about some of these dynamics that we're hearing about, where let's quit changing this thing all the time, but at the same time, give us the latitude and the flexibility to do what's best for our kids, right? So this idea excites me to think about a federal minimum that's stable and reliable. We know we can count on that part, but then a local community-based piece that's more agile and nimble and responds to the local contextual needs of our students and communities. And so I think we can flesh this out and put together a great framework. Now the devil's in the details, and I've been sitting over here superintendent for 16 years, and people are saying, well, why do superintendents respond this way? You know, a lot of this is because it's a lived experience, you know. And as a superintendent leader, you are in a position of authority. Would we all agree? But there's a big difference between authority and leadership, folks. You know, kind of authority is a deal we make with one another. It says, in exchange for safety and order and, you know, those kinds of things, then I'm going to give you my cooperation. But my friend Trevor was talking about the difference between cooperation and collaboration. But you know, so then we start thinking about what leadership is, and that's galvanizing people around solving tough challenges that we want to make happen, or at least make progress on those challenges, right? And so that's a whole different ball game. And so the challenge that superintendents are often faced with is how to thread the needle of the balance between that authority piece and that leadership piece. And so we're trying to figure that out. How do we make sure that certain things happen, trust but verify? And I think about command control. There's some things that we got to make happen, but then we want to spend more of our time on trust and inspire. Because command and control, at best, is probably going to produce mediocrity through compliance. And trust and inspire is going to produce agency and engagement and empowerment and excellence and hopefully transformation. And I think we're on the right path to find the way to thread that needle. And I'm excited because when I hear the collective thought in this room, we have so much in common that we're learning from and with each other that I think we'll find that. So I encourage you, think about what Commissioner Fletcher said overnight, and let's come in tomorrow ready to find a framework, a model framework that we can build upon to flesh out what this actually looks like. But we also have to think about how do we message that? What stories do we tell that paint a picture of what it can be, and it's different from that lived experience of those of us that went through writing portfolios and math portfolios in a high-stakes assessment system and program reviews, because many of the people I talk to, and many of those are superintendents, but other educators, that's what it's hearkening back. Some of this feels like. So it's incumbent on us to show that this is different from that, and that we can get at doing the real work that our students need. But anyway, I'm proud to be in this room with you all, proud to be doing this work, and you all have a great night thinking about this stuff. And let's come in tomorrow with our thinking caps on and our heads full of stuff to get us to the finish line. So thank you all and good night.